Oh, now I'm going to call this meeting to order at 10:03. And I was wondering if, Alicia, you could take roll call.
Member Burton.
Here.
Member Campnese.
Here.
Member Clark.
Here.
Dr. Clay.
Here.
Dr. Hagerman.
Here.
Member Haley. Superintendent Hoffman.
Here.
Member Krabickas.
Here.
Member Meyerson.
Here.
Dr. Robbins.
Present.
President Corr.
Here.
You have a quorum, sir.
And here.
I'm here.
Yeah. Very good. Just a couple of brief comments from me before we get started. Dr. Robbins, I would certainly want to thank you once again for the amazing hospitality afforded the State Board of Ed during our retreat on your campus in August. I think it was maybe the first week of classes. The campus was alive with Wildcats. The hospitality was just amazing. The facility could not have been better. So just wanted to publicly thank you once again for the Wildcat hospitality showing us. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Sorry I couldn't attend with you.
Maybe next time. We'll get you next time for sure.
Yes.
We'd love to come back. Update on calendars, just to make sure that we're all set. The October meeting is scheduled for Monday, October 17th. That is a change from what had been originally posted, but double check your calendars if you would for Monday, October 17th. And then the December meeting. We do not meet in November, but the December meeting is now scheduled for Friday, December 9th. Just making sure we're all on the same page. October 17th, December 9th. And then just want to make known, appreciative of the colleagues who have agreed to join on the Executive Director Hiring Committee. The following members of that committee will be Member Clark, Jenny Clark, Member Clay, Dr. Clay, Member Hagerman, Dr. Hagerman, and Member Haley, Catherine Haley. I will also join that committee, deeply appreciative of everyone who has agreed to serve as we attempt to do the very difficult task of replacing Executive Director Williams. So with that, we'll have an update in item 5C on the hiring process that we'll go through, but those are just announcements. With that, I will turn it over to Superintendent Hoffman for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Good morning, President Corr, Vice President Burton, board members. So good to be with you all this morning. We're working on getting some slides up, but while we are getting our slides up, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge respectfully that the geographical landscape of Maricopa County sits on the ancestral homelands of those indigenous nations that have inhabited this land for centuries, including the Pima, Lehigh, and Louie peoples. I love having visuals, like former educator in me. In the beginning of my presentation, will be focused on, want to keep providing the board with updates on how our investments through the federal COVID relief dollars are making a difference in our schools and sharing data to show what's working.
Melissa, who has the presentation?
Jessica should be receiving it shortly.
Executive Director Williams, do you have a report?
No, sir.
Would it make sense to move to the call to the public? and circle back to the superintendent.
That's up to Superintendent Hoffman.
Yes. Yeah. Jessica, would it cause you any challenges if we moved ahead to the call to the public? Prepared to.
That's not an issue for me.
Okay, then I'm going to ask that we do that. And we will absolutely look forward to circling back to the superintendent's report. But for now, I'd like to move us on to item 2, call to the public. This is, of course, it's a time for the public to comment on items not on today's agenda or on the consent agenda portion of today's agenda. We have a number of speakers I know lined up to chat with us, and looking forward to hearing from them. I would respectfully ask that, given the number of speakers that we have, we limit your remarks to 2 minutes. I will also note that the board received written comments, a number of written comments that we have been able to receive and read over the weekend. So with that, Jessica, who's our first speaker?
Our first speaker, Dr. Kaur, is Allison Wilkes, followed by Kathy Visser. Allison?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment publicly today. I would like to address the recent public attack that Superintendent Hoffman has launched against the Empowerment Scholarship Program, ESA, during her campaign for re-election. I find it extremely concerning that she is incorrectly calling the program a voucher and saying it lacks accountability when she is the one responsible for it. If she is publicly admitting that she has failed to provide accountability for a program she administers, why should we re-elect her? Superintendent Hoffman has been careless and neglectful in her duties at ADE when it comes to the ESA program. Also, because Superintendent Hoffman's openly shows personal contempt for the ESA program, it has allowed a damaging effect on the staff in this department. One of the many examples is the clarity and accountability in making ESA purchases. This past contract year, account holders had ESA purchases that were reviewed by ADE staff and given a pre-approval, reimbursed when purchased, and then subsequently determined to be disallowed. The account holders were then forced to repay these purchases in February of 2022. This demonstrates the lack of accountability and ability for the staff to follow the procedures and rules put in place for the ESA program. Over the past few months, this board has heard a multitude of statements from ESA account holders regarding the ESA rules and the parent handbook. Why is ADE ignoring the rules that SBE put in place for the accountability? Where are the instructions on how to use the ESA program that were promised back in April when the updated handbook was approved? This again demonstrates the lack of experience and training throughout ADE and the failed management of Superintendent Hoffman. It is Superintendent Hoffman's job to oversee and ensure accountability in all areas of ADE, whether she personally agrees with the legislation or not. I hope voters will consider the lack of accountability when they vote her out of office. She is too focused on other issues, many of which are not educational in nature. However, during the remainder of her term, Superintendent Hoffman must be held accountable to ensure that ADE follows the rules set forth by this board.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate it. Felicia?
Thank you. Next up, we have Kathy Visser. I believe she's here in person.
Ms. Visser?
If not, we'll move on to Lynn Fox Embry, followed by Christine Emmanuel.
Ms. Embry, Fox Embry?
Okay, Christine Emmanuel.
She's on.
Lynn, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did. Can you
No,
hear
no,
me now?
We can hear you. Please go.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank the wonderful staff at the Board of Education for getting me on the Zoom call this morning since I had planned to attend in person. Just as a recap, I have 3 kids on the program. 2 are under the classification of special needs and 1 is under adoption and foster care. To say these last few months have been extremely disappointing, frustrating, and sad is an understatement. As a parent with children in the program, I find Superintendent Hoffman's public comments disgrading to the program. I find it alarming that she, as the superintendent of our school system, disrespects the legislation and this board on a daily basis. One of my main reasons for speaking today is this handbook, and I know you guys are sick and tired about hearing about it, but again, we have another concern. Up until this year, I was allowed to purchase curriculum, membership, and split it among all of my students. Because of the way the handbook is written, now the interpretation of the staff at ESA is not allowing us to utilize the funds for our children the best way we can. In the handbook, page 5, number 7 reads, account holders cannot use ESA students' accounts to cover another student's educational expenses, which I totally agree with. The issue is I'm not asking to use one child's to cover the other. I'm asking to split an invoice and equally share the expense among my students. When I asked ESA for clarification, we've been told that we cannot expect the staff to do the math. I find that just ridiculous. My other concern is I've heard that the management team and the AG's office has made this decision, but when I ask who can we speak to get further clarification, it's silence. I have several emails to the staff at ESA that have gone unanswered. I would just like to say I do appreciate everything this board tries to do to support the families that want to use ESA, and I'm hoping that the future we can get a clearer understanding of the handbook and interpretation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fox Embree.
Next up, we have Christine Emanuel, followed by Dr. Kathy Bolts. Christine?
Welcome back, and thank you for the opportunity to publicly comment today. My name is Christine. I am an ESA parent to 4 ESA recipients. The quarterly report states that reimbursements from Class Wallet were delayed due to a Federal Reserve issue that had been described as ACH transfer system being down. Surely this would have made news. This statement on page 10 of the quarterly report strains credibility to the utmost, but Superintendent Hoffman accepted it. This shows her lack of accountability for how the ESA program is run, along with the lack of experience of ADE staff in holding vendors accountable. The staff at ADE under Superintendent Hoffman lacks experience. Superintendent Hoffman approved Class Wallet as a third-party financial vendor. If she feels the ESA program lacks accountability, as she has repeatedly stated in the media and on social media recently, then she needs to get her vendor, Class Wallet, to do better. Her slipshod approach is negligent and shows her lack of leadership skills. Superintendent Hoffman has been much more focused on opposing the ESA program than on leadership at ADE. She has filled ADE with inexperienced staff who lack relevant expertise, showing her lack of management ability. Superintendent Hoffman still has not apologized for releasing so much information about the ESA accounts in January 2020, which was reckless and negligent. She shared this information with her activist group, Save Our Schools, and she has continued to collaborate with that group to oppose the ESA program. This has made ESA families unsafe. Yet Superintendent Hoffman just looks away as special education students are targeted at their own homes. She fails at managing ADE, and she does not accept responsibility for errors that occur under her leadership. As SBE rules for ESA get opened, privacy protections must be strengthened in the SBE rules. This was requested last year, and now ESA parents have the same request. Superintendent Hoffman has shown ESA parents again and again that she lacks leadership ability. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Kathy Bolts, followed by Sarah Blank.
Okay, Dr. Bolts, you're muted. We see you. Unmute. There you go.
Hello. All right. Sorry about that. They just moved me over. I take it you can hear me. Thank
We
you for
can.
the
Please, yeah, please
opportunity.
go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to publicly comment today. This program has been excellent for my students. His middle school classes this past year have included philosophy and ethics and digital privacy. Today, I am speaking about the ESA quarterly report and the plan to reopen the SBE rules. As you know, despite assurances back in the spring that lots of information would be provided to parents about the nuts and bolts of how to use the program, the PDFs are not available on the ESA website of the Department of Education. We still don't have instructions for how to use the ESA program. The handbook remains inadequate. Parents repeatedly ask the same questions, but under Superintendent Hoffman, ADE has neglected to provide answers. This demonstrates failed leadership. Even when ADE claims to provide answers, such as the quarterly report stating that information about debit card purchases is now available, it is not evident on the website, and it is not even included as a link in the quarterly report. This demonstrates further failed management. And again, Superintendent Hoffman's staff released personal information about ESA students in January 2020. This information included names, home addresses, phone numbers, and disabilities. Remember, the majority of ESA students have been students in the special education program. ESA families have been followed and heckled in public playgrounds and at their homes. Superintendent Hoffman has never apologized for this reckless and negligent error and this neglect of privacy of Arizona students. As SBE rules for ESA get opened, privacy protections must be strengthened in those rules. Parents asked for this last year, and we are still asking for it again now. Overall, Superintendent Hoffman's disregard for the ESA program has shown her failures as a manager and leader. Our students deserve better. We appreciate the efforts of the state board for our students, and we hope things will improve in the future. Thank you.
Dr. Bolts.
Next up, we have Sarah Blank, followed by Rebecca Cross. Sarah?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to publicly comment today. Over 7,000 ESA families were doxxed in January 2020. Personal information, including names, home addresses, and disabilities, were shared with political opponents of the ESA program for their failed 2020 ballot initiative. This was reckless and negligent. Superintendent Hoffman has continued to be reckless and negligent by choosing to collaborate with these activist opponents. She has proudly posted pictures of herself signing their initiative, opposing the updated ESA statute. This statute expands the program, and it also includes important revisions for ESA students. As SBE rules for ESA get opened, privacy protections must be strengthened in the SBE rules. As an ESA parent, I'm making the same request as we did last year about FERPA protections for ESA students in the SBE rules. One update in the new statute is allowing computers, tablets, and such for ESA students. Superintendent Hoffman has proudly broadcast her efforts to bring the internet to rural Arizona, and yet she opposes access to computers for ESA students. Right now, special education students who use ESA can purchase computers when they are necessary for their disability. And that policy only came about because other SBE members found a way to support special education students. Superintendent Hoffman has consistently shown her lack of leadership skills by opposing any fixes or improvements to the ESA program. The quarterly report mentions inconsistent purchase approvals. To address this concern, the report says ADE staff meet daily. This approach is not working, as inconsistent approvals have been an issue for years. This demonstrates that ADE staff are inexperienced and lack leadership. Superintendent Hoffman has consistently neglected to address ESA concerns. Her failure to respond to issues and failure to hire experienced staff are a testament to her inability and unwillingness to administer the ESA program. Overall, Superintendent Hoffman's neglect of the ESA program has demonstrated her lack of leadership ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blank.
Next up, we have Rebecca Cross, followed by Kelly Pigettino. Rebecca?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Rebecca Cross. I'm an ESA parent. I have 3 on ESA this year. I have 1 that just returned to public high school, and I also am with one of the Maricopa community colleges. So we are involved in education in a variety of ways. Today, I'm focusing on the ESA program because that's the one that I'm currently struggling the most with. As you know, I'm at these meetings monthly, usually in person, often with one of my children with me. Today, I am speaking to you from home. It is a concern that you've heard from many of us, and so these comments are being repeated apparently, but they are very important. Superintendent Hoffman's responsibilities include administering the ESA program. However, she has repeatedly failed to communicate with what purchases with ESA funds are allowed and approved. I've had items approved for one of my 2 children and denied for another one a week later, multiple times this year already. Under Superintendent Hoffman's failed leadership, her poorly trained staff pre-approved items, checked them again, authorized reimbursement, and then later demanded repayment of those ESA purchases, which clearly been reviewed by ADE staff more than once. This can be financially devastating to families, and we need to know what is approved once and for all. This demonstrates failed management of the ESA program and shows Hoffman's lack of experience and lack of leadership. It also shows her lack of interest. The ESA program has no leadership because she pours her energy into opposing the ESA program instead of doing her elected job. She says she's here for Arizona children, but she's not here for 3 of mine. My children were included in the data breach, the doxing that was referenced earlier. Additional data breaches have occurred under Superintendent Hoffman, and she continues to shun accountability for data security for the ESA program. While she was superintendent, Classwell has shown names of every ESA account, has shared addresses of every ESA, every Class Wallet user on Amazon, and shared a complete IEP with a vendor when a purchase order was sent. I don't even know how that happens. As SVU rules for ESA get open, privacy protections must be strengthened in the SVU rules. These protections were requested last year, and ESA parents are here again to reiterate this concern. Superintendent Hoffman has repeatedly illustrated her lack of leadership, lack of interest, and failure to manage the ESA program. I'm asking for the board to help us with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cross.
Next up, we have Kelly Pichettino, followed by Angela Faber. Kelly?
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you for the opportunity to publicly comment today. The current ESA quarterly report that does not report on debit card transactions. These were reported in the second quarter report in February, when about 40,000 transactions had not been reviewed by Superintendent Hoffman's ESA staff. These transactions represent substantial financial jeopardy to ESA families, especially for families of special education students whose ESAs are funded at a higher level due to the higher needs. Superintendent Hoffman has demonstrated her lack of management through an inability to lead her inexperienced ADE team in reviewing these ESA purchases. This illustrates failed leadership. Superintendent Hoffman docked special education students, including mine, in January 2020, sharing their disabilities along with their names, addresses, and phone numbers with the press and with her anti-school choice activists, who she was recently endorsed by. This has led to families being targeted in public and at their homes. I am asking the SBE rules for the ESAs to get open with some privacy protections. They must be strengthened within these SBE rules. We've asked for it. We made the request last year, and now we're asking for it again, that the rules do have some privacy protections in it. Repeatedly, Superintendent Hoffman has failed to lead. She has failed to manage the ESA program, and she has failed to be accountable for the ESA program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pichettino.
Next up, we have Angela Faber, followed by Kayla Svidin. Angela?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to publicly comment today. Superintendent Hoffman has disregarded the rules for the ESA program that were set by the SBE in its public process. Her management of the ESA has failed to acknowledge definitions laid out by the SBE rules, has ignored deadlines, has not offered ESA parents a venue to raise concerns about the ESA program or about Class Wallet, and has not explained the process of reviewing expenses. Superintendent Hoffman has never commented or communicated how ESA account holders will know that debit card purchases have been reviewed and approved. This is a real financial jeopardy for ESA families, especially those who have special education students like myself who need to incur higher levels of funding. In January 2020, Superintendent Hoffman, as you've heard, inexperienced staff doxed over 7,000 ESA students by sharing personal information, including names, addresses, phone numbers, and disabilities with the media and with the opponents of the ESA program. The doxing was reckless and negligent. Superintendent Hoffman has never apologized to ESA families for violating their privacy. Superintendent Hoffman's repeated actions reveal a distinct failure of leadership and also apathy for the ESA students. As SBA rules for the ESA get opened, privacy protections must be strengthened in the SBE rules. ESA parents asked for this last year, and we find that we still need to ask for it this year. Superintendent Hoffman has time again revealed her failed leadership and failed management of this ESA program that we all dearly love. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Faber.
Next up, we have Kayla Spadine, followed by Kathy Visser. Kayla?
Hello, can you hear me?
You can.
Can you hear me? Perfect.
We can. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to public comment today. Every penny of the ESA funds are accounted for, as the state board and Superintendent Hoffman are aware. ESA families receive pre-approvals and submit purchase requests in good faith. Superintendent Hoffman has never disclosed the process or procedure to ESA families for these purchase approvals. ADE staff are accountable for approving each and every ESA purchase, but under Superintendent Hoffman's administration, the ADE staff have displayed a reckless disregard and mismanagement of ESA funds. Accountability for the gross mismanagement of ESA funds lies with Superintendent Hoffman and her inexperienced and untrained staff, not ESA parents. The current ESA quarterly report depicts a process for debit card approvals. This process has not been shared or communicated with ESA account holders. There is no link on the ESA website nor within the quarterly report. Again, Superintendent Hoffman shows a complete failure of program management. ADE staff are not experienced nor trained. The distinct lack of communication and guidance from the ADE staff is a direct reflection of Superintendent Hoffman's failure to lead. In January 2020, over 7,000 ESA families were doxxed. Their private information, including names, addresses, FERPA protected disability information, were given to the anti-ESA activist group Save Our Schools, which Superintendent Hoffman is a supporter of, as well as receiving support from them politically. This confidential information provided by ADE staff was used against ESA recipients to intimidate and attack vulnerable students and their families. ESA account holders were heckled in public parks and at their homes, me personally. Superintendent Hoffman has never apologized nor sought to remediate this incident. As the state board rules for ESA get opened again, privacy protections must be strengthened in these rules. This request was not fulfilled last year, and we are asking again for privacy protection for our students. Under Hoffman's administration and failed leadership, several additional data breaches have occurred through her third-party chosen vendor, Class Wallet. These breaches include personal data, students' IEP information. Superintendent's repeated actions demonstrate apathy, gross negligence, and a complete failure of leadership. As our superintendent, she should not be allowed to publicly and consistently denigrate and attack our program while being responsible for its running. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have Kathy Visser, who I believe is now virtual.
Oh. Are you able to hear me?
You can. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. Wow, I didn't realize they'd gotten me a URL, so I'm a little behind the 8 ball here. Thank you so much for this opportunity to address the board. I thought I had signed up virtual, and I realized 10 minutes before the meeting started that I had not, and I'm very grateful for whoever jumped through hoops to get me virtual.
No worries. We'd love to hear from you. Please go ahead.
So my name is Kathy Visser. I'm a certified teacher, and this is my 11th year as an ESA parent. Over the years, my children have been enrolled in public charter and private schools and participated in the homeschooling community. I am very supportive of our public school system and the purpose of it. But this program has been absolutely life-saving for especially my older son, my son. I've spent thousands of hours volunteering my own time in the special education community and also with ESA families, helping them navigate this program over the years. And also in the homeschool community. The last 2.5 years have been some of the worst I've seen as far as special education goes for out of my own. I've been navigating the special education system for 16 years myself. But seeing during the pandemic, it just seems like an awful lot of stuff that was already rough as far as getting special education students evaluated for special education just kind of fell into the bucket. I am in various groups all over the place, and every day I see postings where parents cannot get their children evaluated for special education services. Sometimes these parents are wanting the special education services within the school district and they can't get them, or there are other times when parents are wanting to apply for the ESA program. They know their child has a learning disability and they can't get the evaluations through the public system. Let's see, I'm trying to go through my notes here. And we know our system is under a tremendous strain for a host of various reasons. I know that some of the reason we're not evaluating kids is because then they have to comply with providing services, but we need to start by evaluating kids so we even know how many kids need services. And then we can advocate for whatever it is we need to do to fix the fact that we're not giving the kids the proper services. So in the ESA community, we're really running into a lot of families that would like to apply for the ESA, but they don't qualify under the current program, at least pre-September 24th. And I know it's up in the air about the universal, but the universal program is so important because it finally gives a lot of special needs families access to the ESA program that have never had access before, either because they're unidentified or because they just physically can't meet the public school attendance requirement.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fisher. We appreciate your comments.
Okay.
Executive Director Williams, does that conclude the call to the public? First call to the public.
President, board members, yes, that concludes call to the public number 2. And I've been informed that staff have the PowerPoint ready for Superintendent Hoffman's report.
Thank you so much to SBU staff. I'll jump right in, going to slide 3. I just wanted to share first about some updates about our partnership with ASU and the Math Momentum Initiative. So this is a partnership with ASU Digital Prep that is targeting our students in academic achievement, specifically in the area of math, that title implies. And so this initiative started in the summer of 2021, and they have grown it so that it is now serving over 5,000 students at 40 schools in this last school year, and this program will be continued to be funded through our ESSER funds next school year, the 23-24 school year. One component of this program is for schools that do not have a certified math teacher. The program provides instruction virtually from a certified math teacher to those students. So this is ensuring that students, no matter where they are in our state, no matter what access they might have to mathematics instruction and certified math teachers, that they have that rigorous instruction in math. And so the initial data is showing demonstrated improvements, and most notably in rural areas. On to the next slide, we have one example here about the Coyote Springs Elementary School, which is in the Humboldt Unified School District in Prescott Valley. And in Humboldt, in Coyote Springs, they're serving approximately 160 students in 5th and 6th grade. Their Math Momentum teacher pushes in using Google Meets and teaches 2 groups of students during their blocks of math. So she does a total of 6 live sessions a day virtually. Then the math teachers also meet virtually with the teacher, so the local Humboldt teachers, to discuss the plans together for the following week. And so through this partnership, Coyote Springs students and educators have the training and tools needed to advance their math skills. And these results have been replicated in even our most rural, remote parts of the state, including Tuba City. Next slide. And we wanted to highlight that we did a second round of partnership with Donors Choose. And so over the, staying on Donors Choose there, Jessica. You go back one slide. We in total have funded now over 24,000 teachers with classroom supplies, including teachers purchasing books or supplies for a school garden, or for students in special education who may need sensory tools or specialized tools for depending on the student's disability. This really gave our teachers the opportunity to be innovative and creative and empowered. And research shows that teachers who are funded by Donors Choose in these types of projects actually improves teacher retention by 22%. So this is known to be a successful teacher retention tool, and we'll be continuing to advocate for these types of solutions in terms of state funding from our legislature. Next slide. And we want to highlight also how our schools are also using their ESSER funds at the local level, and I get to see many of these initiatives in my school visits. And one example I wanted to share was about Casa Grande High School's tutoring program. And so with this new mobile tutoring program, they outfitted buses on their 16 longest routes with modems, extra battery packs, and they hired paraprofessionals to tutor students while they were on the school bus. So this is a very innovative way to make the best use of every minute of the day and ensure that we're doing everything possible to accelerate learning. And again, why I love highlighting these examples is like, look what's possible, how innovative our schools can be when they have the resources available to them. Next slide. Shift gears over to give an update on our state assessment scores, which were released just a couple weeks ago. And so this is showing our statewide assessment results from the students took this assessment last spring. So this is for the 21-22 school year. And this is with the new assessment tool, the AASA. However, it's very comparable to the former statewide assessment. So we do feel confident in making some statements about what growth is looking like. So, and while across the nation, we are seeing that there have been nationally declines in ELA and math, we're very proud that Arizona is moving in the right direction. We see a 3-point increase in ELA and a 2-point increase in math. And this, we do see success across different grade levels, different demographics, different race and ethnicity. And but of course, there are areas where we can see where there's still a targeted need in certain grade areas specifically. So we still have work to do. We're still not quite where we were pre-pandemic, but we are excited and proud that Arizona is moving in the right direction. And I do attribute these types of gains to the hard work of our educators, our parents, along with having the support of the federal COVID relief funding. We do estimate that about 90% of Arizona students took the AASA, and of course, students participating in the ESA program are not tested by any state assessments. So September is, and Governor Ducey proclaimed September as Suicide Prevention Month, and this is something that we know that this is all something we should care deeply about. And going to the next slide. Tragically, suicide is the second leading cause of death for young Arizonans aged 10 to 34. And so this encompasses many of our students in the K-12 and post-secondary system. When I meet with my student advisors in the Student Advisory Council, I regularly hear directly from them that mental health continues to be one of their top concerns, and they ask how can we continue to support providing mental health supports and services and integrate that into the school communities. And so our department is committed to developing and sharing resources that help teachers, parents, and other community members to reduce suicide in their community. And I wanted to share about a couple of those initiatives. On the next slide. The first is Project Aware, and this is in partnership with the Access Department. And our team they've collaboratively worked together to develop sustainable infrastructure for school-based mental health programs and services. Project Aware supports the development and implementation of comprehensive plan of activities, services, and strategies to decrease youth violence and support the healthy development of school-aged children. And so some of those services and activities that we provide include free suicide prevention training, which does comply with the Mitch-Warnock Act that does require educators are trained in suicide prevention. We also provide a social, emotional, and mental health resource guide to help our educators navigate the myriad of resources available. And then also the School and Behavioral Health Partnership Resource Guide provides concise information and tools that help connect education leaders and behavioral health providers. It defines expectations and goals and provides guidance for handling a behavioral health crisis and helps communities respond to a suicide. So we're very proud of this work that's very collaborative across state agencies and in partnership with our schools. And as we tragically know, our students, our community members from the LGBTQ community are at a higher risk of suicide. And so we want to ensure that our schools are safe and inclusive for everyone. And so one of the resources that we've developed in partnership with our Equitable and Inclusive Practices Advisory Council, in partnership with parents, teachers, and students, was developing resources on our website for helping support LGBTQ students in their schools and communities. So we would encourage you to check that out if you're seeking resources specifically for helping our LGBTQ students. And I get to end with the most exciting, really exciting news, and maybe Superintendent Clay will be joining me in this celebration of, you should just all be so proud that the 2022 National Rural Teacher of the Year is from Arizona, Mr. Ty White, who is a chemistry teacher in Wilcox High School, in Wilcox, Arizona, in Cochise County. Opportunity to meet him in person at the Arizona Rural Schools Conference about a week ago, and a half ago now. And so just really excited for Mr. White to be representing Arizona at the national level. And this again is just one more piece of just how amazing our teachers are across the state, and that our teachers in rural Arizona are just going above and beyond to serve their students. So I just wanted to take a moment to congratulate Mr. White in this forum as well. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Superintendent Hoffman. That's wonderful. I will move us on to the consent agenda, item 3. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I am also super excited. National Teacher Year is pretty amazing. I have one question. Can we get the statewide assessment data at the state level only broken out by the 13 disability categories? I've mentioned this a few times. I think it will really help the state as well as the schools develop more targeted interventions and plans for the kids. Similarly, I was wondering, I believe some of the extra dollars were used to fund the COVID impact study, which was really great. One of the things that I noticed about it was, I hope I'm saying this correctly, the impact to special education students was not consistent for every day. Again, I didn't know if we still had money left, if we could go back and look at that data as well, broken out by the 13 categories, so we can see really targeted. I've heard anecdotally from parents, like some kids did really well, some kids didn't. I think if we could go down just one level, just at the state level, it would be really helpful.
If I might jump in here just as a point of order. I think I don't want to prevent you from answering, but I'm going to prevent you from answering, actually. We will have an opportunity for you to make that exact request at the end of the meeting, and not directly to Superintendent Hoffman, but to staff, and we can get that info to you. Okay. Now, I'm going to move us on to consent item 3, consent agenda. I'll actually be pulling item 3A in order to abstain from the vote on this item, as it involves the mighty Matadors of Arizona Western College. But do any other members wish to pull any other agenda items? What do we have? 3B through 3N. Does any member need any item pulled? Yes, Member Court.
Yes, I'd like to pull item J.
J, 3J. Okay. Yes, 3G. So hearing no other items, do I have a motion to approve consent agenda, the consent agenda minus 3A, 3J, and 3G. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Burton, do I have a second?
Second.
Clark, thank you. Any discussion or conversation about those items? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda item as presented minus items 3A, 3J, and 3G, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay. Then maybe I'll step back and ask Member Burton to run us through item 3A.
So do I have a motion to approve item 3A? So moved. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
You opposed?
You were so speedy there, Vice President Burton. So we have a first by Member Meyerson, a second by Member Haley, and then you can call the all in favor again and real loud.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Vice President Burton runs a much more efficient meeting. Much more efficient meeting. Okay, then I will circle us back to item 3J and turn the floor over to Member Clark for receipt of empowerment scholarship account 2022 quarter 4 report. Member Clark?
Thank you so much. I just have a few questions and I'll leave it open for other board members if you have questions. First, I just want to say thank you to the Department of Education. I'm looking at page 6, item D on the quarterly report, and continually pleased that the applications that are coming through, it looks like almost all of them were processed under 30 days, which is part of the rule. So that's just fantastic and encouraging to hear. I just had a few questions related to some of the things that we had asked for at the last meeting to be included in this report. And one of those items was about the disability categories. And so that was my first question, was there any conversation about including that in this quarterly report?
Member Clark, President Carr, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. It was my understanding at the last meeting, the request for the changes to the report were going to be put in writing and submitted to the board for final approval. So no, we have not made any additional changes that were discussed, but again, it was my understanding that the board would get back to us on those.
Thank you for that.
Oh, there's my video. Sorry, I couldn't find my video.
That's okay. That's okay.
You see it now. Thank you.
Okay.
I think those were the main questions. That's the main question that I wanted to ask, and I'll in case anybody wants to.
Clark, any other questions or comments? Yeah, please, Member Krivicki.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would just reiterate Member Clark's question about the disabilities. I believe I also asked about disability by grade level and by the 13 categories.
Yes, again, it was my understanding, and I might be wrong, so I do apologize, but it was my understanding that you were all going to discuss it and come back to us with a list of items that you wanted changed in future reports. And I do apologize if I'm inaccurate, but that was my understanding based on the last meeting we had, or you had.
Yeah, please.
Just one more question for the director too. One of the things that we also brought up that I had brought up at the last meeting was in relation to the rules. So for board members that are tracking along on page 1 in the introduction, there's an outline of the rule that governs the statute. And it talks about in F4 that there's supposed to be included in the quarterly report concerns for parents that have been submitted to the department, the treasurer, and the private financial management firm, and how the department treasurer and private financial management firm are addressing those concerns. And I was just wondering if a system or a process is in place for parents to submit feedback to the treasurer's office, and whether, because that was the concern last time, and whether that, and why that doesn't appear to be this quarterly report.
I'm looking at the report now. There is a process in place. Jackie from the state treasurer's office notifies me every month with a list of any concerns that she has gotten regarding Class Wallet. And I do believe in this report, it is outlined, but I could be wrong. I'm looking at the report now. But that was a mistake. Yeah, previously we had not. Moving forward in this report, it was notated.
Is that your understanding, Member Clark?
Well, I'm just not sure that parents maybe know that they can give feedback to the treasurer's office. I was looking online on the website and it wasn't clear to me that there was those 3 distinct avenues that are outlined in the rule, which is they can give feedback to the department, they can give feedback to the treasurer, and they can give feedback to the private financial management firm. So maybe what would be helpful, and I can lean on staff if there's anything specific that we need to do for future reports, but it seems like there should be very clear areas of this report where the feedback that was gathered is clearly outlined just so we can follow the rule. And then also the thing I'm the most concerned about is the part of the rule that says, and how those 3 groups, the department, the treasurer, and the financial management firm, are addressing the concerns. And just trying to follow the rule, and then also just make sure that parents who are giving that feedback know that the concerns are being addressed and that we're seeing that too.
Thank you, Member Clark. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I would accept the motion to accept consent agenda item 3J. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Haley, do I have a second?
Second.
Any further conversation? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Are you sure? Yeah. Any opposed, same side.
I'm gonna oppose.
Okay, thank you. You do something.
Well, yeah, I didn't know if I could like explain why I just that part. Yeah, the only reason I'm opposing on this is because it seems to me that the report is lacking something that the rule requires. That's all.
Thank you, thank you. Moving, I guess, back, the case would be to consent agenda item 3G. Member Grivic, you wanted to start a conversation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a short one.
Okay.
Just given that this is a recurring item on every agenda, and I know reading is such an important topic to all of us, I would love to ask for a presentation on the literacy plans, how they're developed, what the process is, what they include.
Noted, thank you. Any other conversation, questions, or concerns? Hearing none, seeing none, I would accept the motion to accept consent agenda item 3G. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
That was close. Scott, all right, Scott by a nose gets the second. Any further conversation? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same side. Fantastic. I will move us on to item 4, which brings us to our second call to the public. Executive Director Williams, do we have any folks who want to chat with us?
We do. We have one individual, Rebecca Beebe.
Great.
Hi, good morning, President Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, and members of the board. My name is Rebecca Beebe, and I am the Government Relations Director for the Arizona School Administrators. I want to thank SBE and ADE staff, the members of the ATAC, and of course you all members of the board for your continued work on behalf of Arizona students. I'm here to speak on item 5A. Today, as you discuss possible cut scores for the A to F letter grade system, we asked the board to keep a couple things in mind. The first is that even though growth remains a component of A to F, the over-reliance on a score on a single test is still the dominating feature of this system. And as we have testified before you previously, numerous studies and research shows that reliance on a test score is not a reliable indicator of a school's quality. Second, please remember that during the 21-22 school year, schools were still dealing with frequent interruptions from the pandemic, including disruptions like the Omicron variant this December through January, which spread rapidly through schools and kept many teachers sick and out of the classroom for weeks, exacerbating our already dire teacher shortage. Some schools had students return in fall 21 who had lost grandma or grandpa to COVID. We also had students returning in fall of 21 who had even lost a mother or a father to COVID. Our teachers did extraordinary work during a very difficult time and deserve our thanks and our praise. Third, please remember the history of A through F. The board set cut scores using the standard deviation model in 2016. Those scores were then used in subsequent years for consistency, and the board has never chosen the 70, 80, 90 cut score model. This is for good reason. It's not only because of the lack of consistency, but it sets an arbitrary grading system from the 1950s on our schools. It harkens back to a grading system from last century and an attitude from last century where we tried to force every kid into one model. We urge the board to reject the 70, 80, 90 model and instead today focus the discussion on the prior year model, which provides consistency, and the standard deviation model, which allows cut scores to rise organically with assessment results. We look forward to today's discussion on the cut scores. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the speakers for call to public number 4, Dr. Core.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Executive Director Williams. I'll move us right on to item 5 and the beginning of the general session. And 5A, speech presentation discussion regarding accountability cut scores. Just reference for traditional, hybrid, alternative, and Arizona online instruction schools for the 2021-22 school year. This is information only, and Director Williams will get us kicked off.
Thank you, President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members. Item 5A is the cut score conversation pertaining to the 2021-2022 accountability system for the state of Arizona. As Dr. Core stated, we have your traditional schools, both K-8 and 9-12, your hybrid, and those are your schools that serve a range, right? Maybe 6 to 12 or 5 to 12. You have AOI schools in which they are being graded for the first time since the re-up of the accountability system in the 2016-2017 school year. We also have the alternative schools within this. Sean Smith, who's the Chief Accountability Officer for the Department of Education, will be assisting me with the presentation today. Apparently, I am the narrator and he is the numbers guy. So you can go to the next slide, Jessica or Melissa. First, we're going to talk about K-8. There are 2 that are being formally proposed and talked about. However, there is a 70, 80, 90 split towards the back of the presentation. So throughout this presentation, you will see PY, which stands for prior year. The prior year letter grade cuts are the same letter grade cuts from the 2018-2019 accountability system. Those cuts from the 18-19, the letter grade system, were the same cuts from the 17-18 letter grade system and from the 16-17 letter grade system. Every year, the State Board of Education would meet to discuss what they wanted to do with cut scores. And up until this point, the board had taken historical action to approve the already established cut scores from the 16-17 school year in order to provide consistency and reliability to the field and to the system. The second option that's before you is the standard deviation. The standard deviation utilizes the current year data to to find the appropriate cuts based upon the spread of scores. So in this presentation, the standard deviation is based upon the data associated in the 21-22 school year. So looking at the K-8 cut score point comparison, we separate out the letter grades, F, D, C, and B. We show a min, so lowest of that range with the max, the highest of that range. And you can compare the difference of the raw numbers between the two cut score variations. Next slide, please. One way in which the board has historically looked at cut scores is by comparing the number of schools that fall within each letter grade. So we have two slides that show that. This one is showing the comparison across the A's, the B's, the C's, the D's, and the F's. Green is a prior year cut. Blue is a standard deviation. I would caution the board, especially because we have a lot of new members, I would caution the board to not set cut scores based upon how many schools have an A or how many schools have an F, and really be thoughtful about the whole entire system and how the cut scores impact the whole entire system. Next slide, please. Here you can see that the letter grades are separated out by our fun rainbow coloring. So we have prior year cuts on the left-hand side and standard deviation on the right-hand side. Prior to going into the 9-12, the accountability, it's called the ATAC. It's the Accountability Technical Advisory Committee. It's a committee of the Department of Education in which the State Board of Education appoints members. They met last week and had conversations around the three models: the prior year cut, the standard deviation, and the 70-80-90 split. The 70-80-90 split can also be considered like a classical cut. We just call it 70-80-90 because it's fun to say very fast. In that ATAC meeting, when we were discussing the K-8, there was a lot of conversation around the members pertaining to the inputs of the K-8 system. The inputs being the data associated with the 21-22 school year. And while the inputs did not substantially change for the 21-22 school year as opposed to the previous 3 years of accountability. Meaning the test didn't change so drastically as we will see in 9-12. Therefore, some of the ATAC members did have an argument that stated that they believe the board should stay with the prior year cuts to provide that longitudinal data across the system and would allow for further study. Members were also pleasantly surprised, as I was as well, at the cuts. I think going into that ATAC meeting, I thought with the impacts that we know of the pandemic and the challenges our schools faced, I was even expecting, an A to be significantly lower than that 84.84 or 86. So that's where ATAC landed with the prior year cut. And that would be their recommendation for the board to have a conversation on. Let's move on to 9-12. I'm going to go through the whole presentation and then we'll come back for questions. Oh, so, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jessica, I forgot we have the spaghetti graphs. Okay. I asked Sean to compare the finalized end counts for the 18-19 school year, the letter grades. That's a left graph that's kind of faded out. I wanted to compare those final letter grades to the letter grades associated with the prior year cuts and the standard deviation for the board members to determine where they felt cuts would be best suited. So again, on the left-hand side, you have the 18-19 letter grades. The middle graph is the 21-22 data utilizing the prior year cuts. And that right graph is the 21-22 data utilizing standard deviation cuts. Next slide. These are known as spaghetti graphs, for lack of a better name. What you're seeing here is you can see the movement and the shifts, and you may be asking yourself, well, why are the end counts different in these spaghetti graphs as opposed to the bar graphs? And that's because there will be schools that naturally drop out of the bar graphs because they don't meet the end count of students. They're too small, which could be end count too. Also, the board has put into place that if you are first year in operation, that you don't get scored. So you'll naturally see some schools drop out. You may also have schools that may have enough students in certain grade levels to meet the end count, but overall they don't meet the end count. So the school doesn't have enough data and they're not graded. So that's the difference between the end numbers. So schools that received a letter grade in the 18-19 school year are on the left-hand side. The schools in the 21-22 school year who also received a letter grade in the 18-19 school year, that is what you're comparing. So if you have a school in the 21-22 school year that did not receive a letter grade in the 18-19 school year, they would not be in this chart. So you can see that there's some movement from the from B schools going up to A. That's a pretty big chunk. And you can also see A schools, a big chunk going down to B's. You have some C's going up to A's. You have some D's moving up to C's. You have some C's moving down to F's. And this is using the prior cut score. Next slide, please. This spaghetti graph has the same caveats as the previous. However, you're looking at utilizing the standard deviation for those cuts. So some of those lines are thinner than the previous, some are thicker than the previous. A little bit more movement. Next slide, please. 9-12. Go ahead, Jessica. These are the 9-12 cut score comparisons. Again, you have the prior year, which is that 19 cut score, and you have the standard deviation. Those are the two models. Again, the 780-90 model is towards the end of the presentation. ATAC members discussed utilizing the standard deviation for 9-12. And the reasoning they gave for utilizing the standard deviation for 9-12 was because the inputs had changed drastically in the 21-22 school year. So your high school students were moving from the AZ-M2, also known as the AZ Merit, to the ACT, which creates different inputs. Therefore, you could have an argument that renorming, because that's what you're doing when you're setting a standard deviation, is you're renorming, would be appropriate because that input data is different than what it was back when the board set the cut scores in 18-19. You can see that there is slight difference from the A's but some of the other letter grades, there's a greater variation. Next slide, please. Again, this is a comparison across the two types, prior year cuts and standard deviation. Orange is the prior year, red is the standard deviation. Next slide, please. The rainbow graph showcases letter grades A through F, but they're combined with the prior year cuts on the left and the standard deviation on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Again, I worked with the department to have a comparability graph for 912. That is the shaded out graph on the left-hand side. So those are the finalized letter grades from the 18-19 school year compared to the distribution utilizing the prior year cuts and utilizing the standard deviation. Bless you. Next slide, please. Here is the spaghetti graph. Again, my same disclosures. Schools had to have both a letter grade in 18-19 and also in 21-22 to be part of this spaghetti graph. So you can see how the schools move from the 18-19 school year to the 21-22 school year, utilizing the prior year cuts. Next slide, please. Here, you're comparing the 18-19 letter grades to the standard deviation cut score option for 912. Next slide, please. Alternatives. Helps. Next slide. Just a little note, alternative schools were first graded in the 18-19 school year. So whereas the other two models had a few years prior, this is only the second year of alternative schools being graded. The ATAC still had conversations around alternative schools, and they wanted to study the data a little bit more before they gave a recommendation to the State Board of Education. And we have a meeting coming up, I believe, with them again. So hopefully in time for the October 17th board meeting, I'd be able to explain to the board where those individuals were thinking in terms of the 19 cut scores and the standard deviation for alternative schools. However, on this slide, you have your raw numbers. Next slide, please. You have your comparisons across types, prior year cuts in yellow, standard deviation in blue. Next slide. You have your prior year rainbow graph on the left and your standard deviation rainbow graph on your right. So that's showing the distribution of alternative letter grades between the two options for cut scores. Next slide, Jessica. Here is the comparison to the finalized letter grades of the 18-19 school year for alternative schools on the left in the shaded out graph, compared to the prior year cut option in the middle and the standard deviation cut option on the right. Next slide. spaghetti graph shows the 18-19 letter grades for schools who were eligible to receive, and then the same schools who would be receiving letter grades for the 21-22 school year, and their movement based upon a prior year cut option. As you can see, there's a lot of movement in alternative schools. Next slide, please. This spaghetti chart is showing the standard deviation compared to the 18-19 letter grades. Next slide, please. This goes back to what you heard in public comment, and then also kind of what I just ad-libbed at the beginning of the presentation, which is the board has historically also looked at the 70, 80, 90 splits. I've been doing accountability now since the 16-17 school year. It's normally one of the first cut score options that is put to the side. We still provide the information to the board because the board still has options to do what the board wants. The key here, that if I had to provide to you like a recommendation, the key is to provide consistency for the system. There are many things that utilize the State Board of Education's accountability system that we as the State Board of Education don't really have oversight of. And we have to keep that in the back of our minds when we're looking to set cut scores. There are real consequences for schools as associated with their letter grade. So you just want to be cognizant of that as well. Next slide. So here's the K-8 cut score comparison, including the bottom graph, which is 70, 80, 90 splits. So, oh, can you go back, Jessica? Thank you. So this is like your traditional grading model. 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is B, et cetera, all the way down. Next slide, please. Here you have your splits utilizing the 7, 80, 90 split on the left-hand side compared to the prior year cut option in the middle and the standard deviation option on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Here's each letter grade separated out by those three options. Next slide, please. These are the changes in the spaghetti graph. So this is comparing letter grades from 18-19 to utilizing the 70, 80, 90 splits. Next slide. Here are the 9-12 cut score comparisons, including the 70, 80, 90 split. Next slide. $70, $80, $90 split is on the left-hand side. Prior year cuts are in the middle. Standard deviation is on the right. Next slide. Across types of letter grades. Next slide. And the spaghetti chart, comparing 18-19 to the 70, 80, 90 cuts. Next slide. Lastly, we have the alternative comparison with the 70, 80, 90. Next slide. Comparison graphs, the 70, 80, 90 on the left, prior year cut option in the middle, standard deviation on the right. Next slide. 3 options separated out by letter grade. Next slide. And the spaghetti chart. And Jessica, I believe that's the end of the presentation. I think there's one more. If that is, can you go back to the beginning slide of K8? And then I'll talk while you do this. One of the accountability values that the board set was that every school had the opportunity to be an A school. And there is a notion that if you're setting on a norm or you're setting on a curve year over year over year, then it's always moving the goalposts for that school to become an A to actually meet the board's values of the accountability system. That was one reason I believe that the board continued to historically approve the prior year cuts from the 16-17 school year. When they looked at it in the fall of 17, for the 17, no, in the fall of 18 for the 17-18 school year, and the fall of 19 for the 18-19 school year. Because schools knew, okay, here's where that cut is, here's what I gotta do to move my students first and foremost, to get them where they need to be, and then I know I will receive points associated with that. So I'm available for any questions. Sean's available for any questions. Let's start with K8. And then you can just tell us which slides in K8 you want Jessica to move towards. And then between Sean and I, we can try to address any questions that are lingering.
Executive Director Williams, just as kind of set the table, today's for information only, just lay out the timeline from here. Which
sure, so today's information only. I would appreciate if board members can kind of get to where they are individually thinking about a cut score, because I have been in those situations when the board members come in October and no one knows what everyone else is thinking, and then it has a real opportunity to get real bad real quick, and that's also not great for the field. So kind of share what your thoughts are, what you're thinking, and we're looking to pick a cut score on October 17th at that State Board of Ed meeting, because there are statutory obligations within 15-241 in which we have to, the department and the board, we have to release letter grades by November 1st. So normally there's a little bit of time between when the board sets the cuts and when letter grades are released, because Sean will go back with his team, double check everything, run everything, send it to us, we release it. It's like a whole big thing. But long story short, Dr. Quartz, October 17th.
Thank you, because I too was part of those conversations that stretched to 4, 5, 6.
Remember the 1 year we had like 8 meetings in the span of 3 weeks?
So we want to have robust conversations. Everything's on the table. We want to hear questions. We want to hear requests. But we will vote on this in October. But really, there's a lot of work to be done between now and October, so that we're ready to do that in a kind of an efficient manner. And I see a lot of eagerness to jump in, so I'll start with Superintendent Hoffman, and then we'll get a chance.
Thank you, President Core, board members. Thank you for the presentation, Alicia. I was just wondering if we could take a minute to introduce Sean, because he is new to the department, and he's formerly was formerly Wendy Davies' role for board members who had many presentations from her. It's sorry to put Sean on the spot, but I do want to introduce our new leader for accountability for the department.
Hi, President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be working with you all. It's an exciting time to join the department and look at this number. I know these are important data for our field, and so thanks for the opportunity to join with you and support you in your conversation. And yeah, happy to answer any questions I can.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, please remember. Yes, and yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I'm more than happy to share where I'm thinking, because I don't want to waste anyone's time on anything. But before I do that, Alicia, I was wondering if you, sorry, Director Williams, apologies. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what the process was, especially since so many board members are new, about how the cuts were initially set. I think it was back in like 16, 17. Just so we have a picture of what that process was like.
So you want the whole, okay, I'll do a shortened version of the whole process.
Perfect.
So that was at a point where the board was having numerous ad hoc committee meetings. The department was having technical meetings with the field around the accountability system. And then ultimately the board approved an accountability system after myself and some former employees with the board and the previous board president did tours of the counties in Arizona, where we met with people in their towns and communities to talk about the accountability system, to get feedback on the accountability system. There was a slight hiccup in the fall of 17, and so the board had to like rerun some numbers and rerun some calculations, and then we released the final letter grades, I think, in early 2017. So it was quite robust. There was many meetings. The catcher was newly hired. But yeah, there was a lot of conversation, a lot of people involved.
Fantastic. And Director Williams, have we ever used the 70, 80, 90 before for K8 or 9-12?
I don't know what occurred prior to 16, 17. I would have to look that up.
But not since then?
No.
Fantastic.
The 16, 17 letter grades were set utilizing the standard deviation of the data from that school year, and then the board took action to continue to use that cut score for the 17, 18 and the 18, 18 school years.
Okay, great. So another clarifying question. So the prior year cut on the K8, if I'm understanding everything correctly, that is what we did in 18, 19. The prior year cut for K8 is what we did in 18, 19.
Correct.
Okay.
And 17, 18 and 16, 17.
Perfect. And then I think it was on slide 12, maybe if I have it right. So for 9-12, that's different because you talked about how the inputs had changed drastically. So there, it was standard deviation.
Correct. That's what the ATAC spoke about, and that's what they were
recommending
and leaning towards.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. I personally for 9-12, just so that my fellow board members know, I'm leaning towards standard deviation for 9-12, but prior year cut for K8.
Anyone to my right? Yeah, please, Jason. We'll just come right on down the line. If you want to pass, you can pass. Let's do it that way. Go ahead.
Thank you, President Fuller,
Yeah,
Superintendent Hoffman, Vice President Burton, Executive Director Williams, and fellow board members. I think that was my question. We can differentiate between the different levels, right? So to just clarify.
Yes, that was in the ATAC meeting. I actually brought that up with Sean and the ATAC members as they were talking about what they wanted. I didn't know if we could do it, but I've checked with Sean and he says we're good to go if the board wants to go in 2 different options for cuts.
Okay.
We're fine.
Then with that being said, I think that I agree with my fellow board members that for high school, I think it definitely makes sense for standard deviations if we are reforming the levels based on the ACT, just because it's going to be a completely different scale otherwise. And then as a 7th, 8th grade teacher, I think that it is something that I can't emphasize enough. The difficulty that our students have been through in the last few years, not just through readjusting to in-person school, but also the fact that there's so much trauma that has gone on in their lives. So that's why I think that prior cuts make sense for everyone.
Thank you so much. Member Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, Executive Director. I apologize at the outset if my comments seem haphazard, but I'm kind of taking notes, so I apologize if the logic doesn't flow. One of the original selling points of letter grades was that the public understands it, for better or worse. We can all debate the merits of the letter grade system, but the people understood that what an A means to B means. I just don't think that the public would understand prior year form standard deviation. And you know, having been around on the first team that developed the school report cards at ABE, that was one of the things that we struggled with, is how to make that whole system understandable to the public. I would also thank you, Director Williams, for using that term renorming. That term perfectly encapsulated kind of my gut about standard deviation, but I hadn't even thought of that word. But that really confirms that. And I feel like the bigger question for us is, what is an A school supposed to look like? A school in statute is supposed to be an excellent school. I feel like we're either, whichever method we use, we're kind of picking just a random number and it's based on impact data and bell curves and stuff, rather than saying, as a state, what do we really think an A school should look like? I know that is a wholesale change in thought, but I want to throw that out there as we move forward over the years to really think more broadly about what an A, B, C, D, and F school would look like. But for now, since we're going to do that within 1 month, it does make sense to me to stay consistent with that prior year, at least on the K-8 side. But I did have a couple other questions or thoughts for the future that maybe state board staff and Sean can get back to me on, is what do other states use? And also, what are, do we have the data for the individual components of the letter grades? Because those are pretty telling, especially when I think in my mind of what an A school looks like. I'd like to see that. I've seen some of it on the website, but some of it not. I was looking last night. Also, how many schools are ungraded? And I apologize for some of these wonky questions, but I was around when we did the No Child Left Behind waiver, so I know the things that I was getting asked. So those are unfortunately some of the things I'm thinking. How many are ungraded? Also, one of the things that was interesting in that process was Secretary Duncan at that time was not approving any state waivers unless the state could demonstrate that more students were included. And it wasn't until that point that I realized we've never had that conversation as the state of how many students are included in these systems, because all of the policy decisions that we're making, whether it's from N size to cut scores, really affect the amount of students that are included in the system. So I would be interested in that data as well. And also the list of AOI schools. Again, I was there when we weren't getting grades and getting pushback for that. So I'd be interested in how many those were. Sorry, I guess I know it's kind of random.
I want to clarify, you do not expect this before the October 17th board meeting. This is something that's a longer term project.
Some of them, I think, just like how many schools are ungraded. I mean, we can talk about it after the meeting. But yeah, some of them are longer. Some of them I think are easy.
I can take a look if.
I'll tell you what, Member Kravickas, we will work with Sean to take a look. And that's the best I can do.
And I'm happy to follow up. So those are, like I said, these are just all the things that were going through my mind last night and today. Oh, I did have one technical question on the great bar graphs where the 18, 19 are blurred out and then the PY. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. It was interesting to me, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, that we have more like, you would, how can I say this? 18, 19 was prior to the pandemic. The other ones are post-pandemic. So the logic, again, if I'm a parent or a public member, you'd expect to see this huge decrease. Unfair, given the pandemic. I'm not saying that was what I would like, but that again just doesn't seem to jive with what you would expect.
Correct. Now I will say, and Sean, you can tap me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that those end counts in the bars in the middle and the right still have those schools that would ultimately get filtered out.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So the schools in the middle and the right, some of those schools are going to filter out because they don't meet the end count. They don't have enough points to get a letter grade. They would end up with like a not rated. And you saw a significant increase in both district and charter Arizona online schools, right? So because it's the first year that those are being graded, there could be a potential of having some K-8 AOIs thrown in there, which will bump up some of the end count numbers.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes sense, but that's exactly why I wanted to know how many schools are ungraded number. But and again, I'm just saying, if I'm I always think of the three Ps, the public, the press, the parents. Those, it just doesn't seem like it would make sense post-pandemic. Again, unfair, and I'm not suggesting it would, but you would, because we were all seeing on the news nationally, test scores are going down, schools are struggling, and then you see that, you're like, wow, they seem to do pretty good.
Thank you. Member Haley?
President Core, Vice President Burton, Superintendent Hoffman, Director Williams. I really appreciate this conversation. I feel like I need a lot more information too before I make a decision at the October meeting. I did wonder how our cut scores compare to our results on the NAEP, the National Standard or the Report Card. I know it's not necessarily apples to apples, but given our sort of place in the country, I would really like I would like to be able to understand how our cut scores in our state report card compares to that. I know it's a little bit seemingly out of the norm, but it would help me understand where we are situated.
Superintendent Hoffman.
Thank you, President, Core, board members. I think what Director Williams mentioned about our schools needing consistency, stability, knowing where the goalposts are is all really important, and also being able to do the analyses from year to year to year. So I am also in support of using the prior year for K-8 and then renorming for high school and use a completely new assessment. I'd be interested in hearing more feedback from stakeholders on that. But at this point, seems like a science-based direction. And as far as when I look at those graphs, that we can actually go back to the slide we were just looking at. I don't know what the yes, that one. So what we know is from, I just want to make sure, so this, I want to make sure we're looking at 21, 22. So those are, okay, yeah, got it, okay. So what I've been reading and analyses we've been able to see in the news at the national level is that nationally, looking at 21, 22 is where we saw massive declines, like the National Assessment for Educational Process, the NAEP. The only report I've seen so far is that for 9-year-olds, they had historic declines, like never seen before in 30 years in both reading and math. And whereas Arizona made growth. So I think, we do weight heavily and want to continue to incentivize our schools for the amazing work they do that has led to growth. So that's kind of how I'm reading this, is that we are moving in the right direction, and this is really grouping everyone all together, all students, all grades. But when we look at the LEA levels, or like some of our LEAs have made tremendous growth, and so this is more of a all-encompassing, where we know some didn't make growth and others did, but by and large as a state, we are moving in the right direction, and I think that that's what's captured here. So it is upon us and our communications team to help inform and educate the public and the press and the parents on what the score means and how to interpret the school report card on our website. So continue to make sure we're doing everything possible to get people.
Thank you, Superintendent Hoffman. I will flip over to the left. Is Dr. Robbins still with us?
Do not believe so.
I will then move to all the way to the left, and Dr. Hagerman, any thoughts, questions, or comments?
President, core members of the board, to kind of restate Director Williams' feelings, having been in 2017 and the stress and just that whole process was unbelievably just kind of just turned your world upside down. So the ideas of doing anything that Reese does that at this moment is not a great thought for me. I think we really need to think about consistency, and then and that idea of not continuing to reset in a way that all of a sudden not everyone can get an A as being a value that is ongoing with us. So I agree with the idea of prior year for K, and then the thought that now that ACT is such a new input, we need to consider that. The one thing I do love the idea of an ongoing discussion of what an A school looks like, because we can think qualitatively about what are we saying as a community when we say it's an A school. I love that idea. So that's, I think philosophically continuing the course of where the board has been over time and continuing that forward is the best way to.
Dr. Klein?
President Board, Core, and members. This was great conversation. I just wanted to share some of the bullets I've written on my computer. I do agree that the K-8 modeling of the two options favor the cut scores, and then 9-12 standard deviation is just the best thing to do. We do need consistency. That is another thing. And I do believe that it's pertinent that all school districts, because I've talked to a lot of superintendents, and they're saying that all school districts and the community has to have a clear understanding of the rating system so that the school districts and the schools can work towards their goals. And I would also add that maybe we can evolve our form of accountability, which right now is completely based on test scores, maybe to evaluate the effectiveness of elementary schools differently from our secondary schools, hence using two different models. And the other thing is, whatever the scores end up being, that we don't hold our schools hostage by data that doesn't take into account the whole child approach. We should be looking at the whole child approach. I don't know how that's going to look. I know one person can't do everything, but together we can do everything. So that's something I think we can look at, because we as educators, we do pride ourselves in our schools, in Arizona. So listening and relooking and evolving is something that we should really take seriously. Thank you.
Member Meyerson?
Thank you, four members of the board. I think I very much appreciate the point of consistency and wanting to ensure that schools, especially post-pandemic, have that sort of very clear sort of line of sight on cut scores. I guess my question, I don't know if it's actually a question for our member Kathy's from a mathematical perspective. But I'd be curious, when should we look at standard deviation? It sounds like obviously we weren't looking at that for the whole kind of, from 2016 up until obviously the pandemic, which again makes sense for creating sort of the line of sight and the set of consistency for schools. But when would it make sense to actually relook at the data, make sure that we're still setting the bar high in terms of quality, in terms of the quality of schools that we're providing for our kids? I don't know, not to put them on the spot, but or if that's a question posed to come back to it, or Sean.
Yeah, let's agree. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think you all are hitting on a lot of the key things that we're seeing here, which is, especially as we're kind of talking about the variability. We look at standard deviation as that kind of measure of like how much kind of wiggle room and difference is happening. I think that's what the data has really been showing us, is that the outcomes for different schools, the changes in the amount of difference between those outcomes is a lot different this year as we're coming back from 2021. So I think Member Kariga hit on the idea that, intuitively we would kind of expect 21, 22 data to look pretty low. And it's been a nice surprise to see it kind of come back out of where we were with the pandemic and some of that stuff we were seeing there. And I think we hit on that a lot, like that idea of like what we really have seen is, while some of the metrics are recovering, the differences in each of those things is a lot wider. So we're seeing wider standard deviations that are moving kind of away from that. And that idea of how can you, what's an expected difference away from each of these measures is, I think, kind of the question that we're looking to answer here. So if that helps clarify, I think to your question, it's useful. A lot of the discussion, has been around like, is the prior year cuts appropriate and helpful for in particular the K-8? That in that case, it kind of respects and says, this is kind of the variability that we saw pre-pandemic, and it puts them in a little bit safer space to say, here's what we were up against. Here's kind of like a what used to be normal, and this kind of fits in there, and so we can see that recovery a little bit better. And then that point to the 9/12, where we've had that whole different measure. What is kind of the new normal? It gets a little bit noisy probably with the pandemic and the ACT. But yeah, that question, it seems a lot more appropriate there to start saying like, okay, let's define what the new normal is. Where's kind of that line of what's expected, and then how big are those differences there?
Thank you. I think it would be helpful maybe at our next meeting to just have a sense of maybe when that conversation would be most appropriate. And then maybe as a follow-up, would it be mathematically correct to say that part of the reason we're not seeing such a dip in letter grades this year, which I think we would have expected given just the state of the world over the last 2 years, could be also because proficiency was so low last year when grades weren't collected, and there was so much more growth this year following that just very significant dip in proficiency. So it's not necessarily that proficiency has increased, although obviously superintendent mentioned that we did see some bumps. It's not necessarily there was a massive gain in proficiency, it's just that we saw so much growth because of last year's pretty dismal performance across the board.
Yes, that's very correct summary of both those data. So we've seen proficiency come up a little bit nicer than we would have thought. And then also, again, in most of the models, the growth is a big piece of it. And so we've seen growth, which is a little bit more stable measure anyways, kind of bounce back. One of our experts we work with on growth, Dr. Peterman, he described it as, when we came into the pandemic, kids were going along at their kind of rate of growth. And he described it as like academic headwinds. And he said what we saw in the data is, the pandemic had those strong headwinds, and we're starting to see that rate of growth recover. So you're hitting it exactly right. We're seeing there both the increases in proficiency and then that strong increase in the rate of growth that's kind of coming back.
That's great. Thanks. And so I guess then maybe my last question is sort of a follow-up to, I don't think we should address this at the October meeting, but to the point of sort of a future conversation, I think that I would be really curious about, obviously growth is just exceptionally important, of course, and also the absolute performance of our kids and ensuring that we are tracking and our letter grade system is accurately reflecting where true absolute performance is, so that kids are ending the year at a second grade level versus just having made a year and a half of growth, but still ending the year at a first grade level. So how do we as a board continue to support schools in heading in that proficiency absolute set of kids?
Vice President Burton.
President Core, members of the board, first I want to thank Julia, member Meyerson, because she said a lot of things that have been sort of rattling in my mind, so thank you, and I won't repeat them. So first I have a question for Director Williams. You said that we don't have a recommendation for the all schools. When will that happen? And when will we?
Well, after you all went through your individual conversations, Vice President Burton, I was going to ask the board what they thought about alternative, and if there was anything I could bring back to the ATAC to get those members to talk about what their recommendations were.
I'd like to just see more information. It feels like I have enough, and I understand it's a new test, but I would like to see more information because
for alternative
schools, because they're reaching some of our most vulnerable. So I think it's really important. Right now, I am leaning toward just for consistency and for comparability, the previous year K8 for K8, and then renorming or whatever. Considering that we're using the new test, using standard deviation. That's where I'm leaning. I do want to dig in and rest today. But I also want to mention and I know we're not talking 70, 80, 90, but I do think, and I appreciate that you provided those slides, provided that information. Because it's just good for us to take a look at that. Just for reference point. I think it's valuable information.
First, I would certainly like to thank Sean and Alicia for very thorough information. For the life of me, I still don't understand the spaghetti graph and everything else I understood. So
It's like slides. It's like the McDonald's slides, you know?
I think I have a firm understanding of the big picture, but that particular slide still escapes me. But and thank you. So I think as I sit here today, I'm very much in line with the general thinking of the group of prior year for K-12 and the standard deviation, the norming, if you will, for our high school. And again, a lot of amazing work being done by the ATAC too, and their efforts need to be recognized. So I would ask this of my colleagues on the board as you take a look at this in the coming days, if there are pieces of information that you feel would be helpful to expedite our conversation on the 17th. Again, I'm hearkening back to some earlier goes at this when I sat on the board, and there were a number of questions in the slide. It's just not even possible to kind of calculate and do what ifs on the spot. So your role is respected and appreciated, and if there's information you want, the sooner you can arrive at what that looks like, that would certainly allow our patient staff to pull all that together. So with that was information only. Are there any other? Yeah, Jason, please.
Thank you, President Court. Just one more question. Can we look at, and I think this goes with Member Meyerson's kind of questions too, about what would we kind of see, like the growth that we need to see in order to adopt a new model as well. Can we see the past 3 years based on attendance data for children as well?
Well, yes, President Core, Member Katniss, yes. However, this board is gonna have to determine a couple things. One is right now we're having the cut score conversation. And so if we wanna look at attendance, we wanna look at proficiency and setting a standard deviation for K and 9-12, or changing the system and looking at inclusion and acceleration and looking at what we're compared to national and potentially looking at a 70-80-90 split at some point, then the board has to have a conversation on the accountability system as a whole. Because what will happen is we'll run for Sean Ragged in 2 weeks' time. So
we're not concerned about that.
What we can do is I can take the attendance for the past 3 years. Are you including the 2 years in which we did not have letter grades but had component scoring for the 2021 school year?
Yes.
Okay.
And my reasoning is just because I think attendance is changing drastically too. If you had a student who, was out of school and it was because of COVID-19, and then everyone around them also had to quarantine for a certain amount of time. So I think that last year is so much different from this year in the school system, just because you don't have half of your class missing at any given time. And so I agree that growth is probably a major component in what we're seeing. But if we also want to look at proficiency later on, that's whenever I think that it would be appropriate to discuss changing.
So President Core, Member Cantney's board members, the other thing that the board can do, so you have that 5-year accountability plan that the previous makeup of the State Board of Education approved in December of 2021 or January of 22, one of the two. That's on the board's website. I would ask that the board members take a look at that. Look on the board's accountability pages, which will show the business rules and will show how the different indicators are weighted and what's included in those indicators. And then come back. We'll have to come back at some point and talk about the accountability system as a whole. To what Member Meyerson was talking about of like, well, when do you set cuts? I'm not a psychometrician. I'm just one who at one point worked in the school system. I think I personally think within the pandemic and through pandemic challenges, you have your assessment challenges. I think you could probably look at some type of cut score raising plan within like 3 to 5 years. It just depends on what the data looks like. But the board should have, I would recommend that the board should have a very in-depth informational type conversation that includes a lot of stakeholders from the state. Because that helps build rapport with not just the State Board of Education, but rapport within the system as well. To Member Haley's question pertaining to the NAEP scores, Sean whispered in my ear that the department should have those files maybe early October, so we'll try. You and Member Kravickas, you have a, we'll try.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To staff and or Sean, can you just tell me how the alt schools are designated now?
President Core, Member Kravickas, alternative schools. Are you talking? I don't know, I can't see.
I can't if you want.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go here.
For the course, Superintendent Huffman and members of the board thing. So to make sure I understand the question correctly, how do they become an alternative school? So they go through an application process, and part of it is, they have to submit their mission statement that says we're addressing the specific needs of these kids. And then they have to meet a couple of other metrics and get that application passed. So they kind of sign up and say, like, this is what our school's about. Here's what we do. And then they get graded under that different.
Just to, Dr. Porter, Member Kravickas, just a couple of things. The criteria for how to be an alt school is set by the board. They recertify, those alt schools have to recertify every year. And ADE over the last few years has started, I believe, auditing the schools and ensuring that their enrollment counts meet, that their student population has to meet, I think a certain percentage, it might be like 70% in one of those criteria. So they audit it to make sure that they're actually.
Thank you, Kensha. With that, before we move on to 5B, I think we're probably ready for a break, yeah?
Yes, and there is.
Right. Yep.
There's food upstairs if anyone would like food, and we'll send Lou with you to make sure y'all behave.
Lou is the lunchroom monitor. That looks great on a resume. So, let me make sure I understand, Executive Director Williams. Are you suggesting we take a little longer break to grab something?
That's up to you, President Core. You are the boss.
I would just assume plow through, and if someone wants to go up and grab a snack, they can certainly do that. But let's take 15 minutes. I've got exactly 12 o'clock. Let's call it back at 12:15. Yeah. Thanks. Start feeding folks, won't it?
Nobody wants to come back.
Very good.
Good.
I was gonna say something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
All right, it appears we have quorum. I'd love to get started. Call us back. Call us back into session at 12:19 and move on to item 5. And this is also for information only, presentation and discussion on the 2021-22 accountability appeals process, procedures and timeline for a school to appeal its letter grade. Director Williams.
Thank you, President Core, Vice President Burton, Superintendent Hoffman, and members. My computer uploads. I will go off the top of my head here. So your current staff, including Jessica Mueller, myself, and Ketcher, have been running the accountability appeals process now since the beginning of time. And you will notice within the materials that the appeals process is similar to other years of accountability. Staff did try to notate the COVID-19 pandemic. So within the appeals process, we do provide an example of how schools could utilize COVID-19 as a reason for an appeal. And the example that we're given is a school that serves part of the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo Nation puts in a specific order in which students can't attend school in person. That's not something that the school or the school district or the charter can actually prepare for, which is another government agency, in this case Navajo Nation, putting different requirements of their people at the school and being in person. So therefore that could be a potential to appeal for COVID-19. This appeals process actually opens once letter grades are released. Again, if you remember from the last agenda item, letter grades have to be released by November 1st. You know, sometimes it's a couple days earlier. Once that occurs, board staff, we will upload the Google form link to this document that's attached to item 5B. I did get some emails from the field about, hey, the link's not live. Well, the link's not live because it's not time to submit appeals yet. Once staff gets those appeals, the appeals process only lasts until November 15th. So in years prior, it's been about 15 days for a school to turn around their appeal to us. And then we, as soon as we get that appeal, we work internally and we work with Sean and his team over at the Department of Education to process those applications in time for the appeals committee, which will be 3 members of the State Board of Education, in which Dr. Kaur will appoint members to that at the October 17th board meeting. Those individuals would then hear expedited and non-expedited appeals, and the board will ultimately take action on appeals at the December 9th board meeting. That's the timeline.
Any questions? Thank you, Director Williams. Any question about the process or the timeline or how that's handled? Again, just for information only today. Member Kravitz.
Mr. Chair, Director Williams, just a general question. How did it go last year? I was reading through that, just trying to envision. I don't know how to more tailor that question, but was the appeal process any different last year?
We did not, President Kaur, Member Kravitz, we didn't have letter grades for the 2021 school year, nor the 1920 school year. So the last time we did appeals would have been the fall of 19. And it went pretty smooth. Great.
Good, yeah. What Dr. Kaur, Member Kravitz, appeals are, and Member Burton can attest to this, having been on the appeals committee. Some of them are pretty cut and dry, but some of them can be difficult. So the committee's task and the board's task, I think, will be finding consistency, especially amongst those, because I think the board will find there will be themes and categories of some of these appeals. So if the board, if they start approving one of those, they need to start approving all within that category for the most part, and then stand behind those decisions. So that'll be a challenge. But yeah, I think it went.
Any other questions or comments?
President Core, members of the board, I've been on the appeals committee 2 or 3 times maybe, and I think every year it's improved because I think a lot of it does have to do with what Kat just said with the the consistency in the grounds for appeals. It's not sort of arbitrary and who tells the best story. I think it's particularly important when we have LEAs with all kinds, from one small school to the largest school district in the state. I think it's really important that we just hold the same grounds for appeals and treat everybody the same.
Thank you, Vice President Burton. Okay, then I'm going to move us on to 5C, and this is a presentation, discussion, and possible action, hopeful action, to approve the position description and hiring timelines for the board's executive director position. So Director Williams.
Thank you, President Core, members. A few updates on the timeline, which I presented at the board's retreat in Tucson. I did add the week of September 26th, which is this week. I'll be sending out calendar surveys to the hiring committee so that we can establish some meeting dates. As you know, what has occurred between the retreat and now is that Deputy Director Baden is moving on to a fabulous position with, can I tell him? Oh, okay. He's going to be moving over to the Arizona Board of Regents October 1st. So today is his last day with all of you and all of us. And I'm personally going to miss Catcher so much and probably message him once I leave here and be like, let's meet up. But as you know, he is also leaving. And so it is my belief that the working relationship between the executive director and the deputy director is a close one, and it has to be one that is foundational in trust. So while I will be hiring the open positions of constituent services, project director, policy project director, some admin positions that we currently have open and are interviewing for this week, I will be waiting on the deputy director position until about 2 to 3 weeks prior to the board making its decision for the next ED. What that will allow the new ED to do is take those applicants, kind of work with me and our staff of who they want to interview. Hopefully they can sit in on those interviews, select who they want. I'll handle all the paperwork for the new EDs so that they don't have to deal with any HR type systems on their first day in the office on January 9th. You will also see that I will be drafting a transition plan that the board will see at the December 9th board meeting, so that the board, the staff, the public is aware of what has been conversed about in the past few months at the retreat, at future board meetings, so that nothing falls off the table. As for the position description, I took language from the 15 position description and the 2017 position description and kind of merged it a little bit, looked throughout statute to determine how the role has kind of shifted since I was hired in 17. This draft actually goes to ADOA HR, and they have to put it within their human resources type document. So it will look a little bit different when they go to post it. But if anyone has any questions or concerns, I tried to capture what the board discussed at the retreat.
Thank you. Yeah, member Haley, please go ahead.
Executive Director Williams, will some of the particulars for those that will serve on the hiring committee, will we discuss document sharing process, all of that would be addressed by that committee when we host an organization meeting?
Correct. So I will be bringing forth the work of the previous hiring committees so that we're not starting from scratch. We'll work on the process, the types of questions, if the hiring committee would like to do any type of tasks like in baskets. Most of the meetings probably will be virtual since a lot of our hiring committee individuals are coming from out of Maricopa. And then when we go to schedule interviews, we could hold those in person. And then I'm still working with ADOA to find a recruiter. So once that recruiter's been assigned to us, then ADOA can kind of help us with the legalities of the hiring process.
Thank you for that, because that was the other piece, because there's some state hiring protocols that are pretty prescribed, as I understand it, we'll have to adhere to.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Executive Director Williams, could you just, and I apologize if I missed this in the timeline, but can you talk to me a little bit about, so the committee, will they, obviously it sounds like screen the first set of applicants, what will then ultimately come to the board? Is it one final recommendation? Is it 3 members? Sort of, what will the board ultimately receive?
The board will ultimately receive 1 individual at the December 9th board meeting. And then the board will go into executive session to discuss that position, and they come out and they vote to hire that individual.
And perhaps this is, I'm sorry, perhaps this goes to a member in a discussion. Will we see who was considered by the committee, or if that's rejected, but in terms of who will ultimately get sort of what level of involvement?
Yes, the board, so there's internal documents within ADOA. So when I go to hire someone and I interview 5 people, there's documents I have to sign that says, here's the person I select, here are the people I interviewed. So the board, I would assume, would see that document, and I would assume that the hiring committee is going to have a conversation with the other board members on why they think this is the best person. These types of questions are hard for me to answer because I wasn't, first of all, it happens in e-session. And secondly, I was not part of any of that process. So that's how it goes.
Is it, and actually I'm not nervous in the sense of, is it typical where the committee brings back just 1 versus brings back 2 for the board to choose from? Just curious.
It has been our protocol, or at least it was with the hiring of Alicia. And so it is not a committee of the whole. Mm-hmm. There is a subcommittee that will do the work and bring back a candidate. And again, conversations would then occur in executive session.
Yes. Can I pose a question to the board? Do we like that process, or is the whole board getting to review, the 2 final candidates that made it, versus just relying on the committee members to make 1 selection versus delivering 2?
We can pose the question, but well.
I would not.
I was not yelling at you. I swear I wasn't. I think it's a little twofold. One is there has to be some trust within the hiring committee to find the individual person. I think that when you get to December, and if some board members in e-session determine like we don't like this person, I mean, that could be appropriate feedback to the hiring committee, I guess. I think there's also a layer, I got to figure out what's appropriate in ADOA, HR, because it's the E-level position. It's a political position-ish. And
if the board, let me just have some conversations with ADOA HR.
No, President Carr, members of the board, you actually, that was a question I had, is it an ADOA policy that the area committee brings back to one person? But my understanding now is they make a recommendation and then it's discussed in e-session. And then there's a vote if that's how it seems like the board wants to go. Is that correct? Or I'd just like some clarity on that process.
I am currently following the process that was utilized when I was hired and when the former executive director was hired, which is the hiring committee does all the interviews, does all of the reviews. The board members have expressed at the retreat, like kind of who they're looking for. And then that hiring committee makes a recommendation to the board. Then the board goes into e-session, has a conversation, then comes out and takes action to hire somebody.
So will the board know if the hiring committee decision was unanimous? I mean, recruiters love to just give one candidate because it makes their life easier, but it's not always.
I think that that's a conversation that would probably occur in e-session. I would always highly recommend that the executive director needs to feel as if the board supports the executive director, and the executive director needs to support the board. So there has been instances when there has been board members who vote to not hire the executive director, and so you have a split board vote. It is what it is. You're ultimately the Board of Education. You can vote however you want when hiring the executive director. This is me personally as a person, not as the current executive director. I think it looks good if the whole board can lend their support behind someone that you're hiring to lead an organization in a state agency. But there has been instances where it has not been a unanimous board vote to hire the ED. I was unanimous.
You are.
I think it's important just for messaging purposes, so that's fine.
I would, and I know we can explore these questions because it's not actually part of the motion we're going to entertain, but I would suggest that if we're going to have a hiring committee, it either be a committee of the whole and everyone participate from the start, because it absolutely devalues the work of that committee then to say, do all the work and bring us 2 or 3. So we either have a hiring committee as we're currently set up, and I'm certainly open to a committee of the whole, or all 11 of us can participate from the beginning to the end, see all the documents, be part of all the deliberations, and ultimately cast our vote in the end. I would also think that it's really important that we have that executive session where these questions can be asked, and we can do that in an executive session.
President Corr, I will
Yes.
also remind members that the fall is very busy. So there will be 3 of you going on like an appeals committee, which will be meeting at the same time as a potential hiring committee, which is meeting at the same time as state board meetings. So then we have the NASB annual conference, and we have the Excel and Ed National Conference. There's a lot of things within the months of October and November. So if the board decides to switch gears and move from a hiring committee to a committee of the whole, like that is going to be a very large commitment from the board members. So are we sticking with hiring committee, or are we?
Well, I'm not seeing anything in this motion that prevents us from taking this motion, but I'd love to hear thoughts. Can people commit to being part of a committee of the whole, or do we want a hiring committee? Superintendent.
President Corr, board members, I'm happy to share my perspective that I have full trust in the committee, the hiring committee made up of the 5 board members to bring forth the strongest candidates.
Other thoughts?
I mean, I'm happy to share. I think my question was really also more just in sort of the process to member Burton's perspective. I also then fine to do that, for the, so, but I mean, it would just be helpful to understand, will we get to see who the applicant, I mean, just so that we have more information, so when we go into that executive session, we just have more information, so
Sure.
we'd love to understand that. And I'm 100% fine, Superintendent Hoffman's point to have the committee do the work.
And President Corr, Member Myerson, the hiring committee will provide an update to the board on the process at the October 17th class meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice President Burke?
Oh, no, I just want to reiterate, President Corr, board members, I have total trust, and I think you've spoken an excellent hiring committee. So I too just wanted to, I wasn't around when Director Williams was, she's been here as long as I have, so I just.
I think I was the only one.
So thank you for giving us on.
Good conversation. So do I have a motion to approve the executive director's position description, direct Director Williams to post the position on the state job sites by the first week of October and approve the hiring timeline as presented? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Member Myerson, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Clay. Any additional conversation? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Fantastic. And move us on to D, where we will begin a series of motions to open rulemaking on a number of things. So item D speaks to the presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures for educator certification. Director Williams.
Thank you, President Corr, members. Item 5D is opening rulemaking procedures on educator certification. If members do not have any questions or concerns about opening rulemaking on item 5D, you can go ahead into the motion, President Corr. Otherwise, Deputy Director Baden can walk board members through the agenda item.
Fantastic. Does anyone need any additional information or have any comments to make? Okay, then I will in fact call the motion. All in favor of approving item 5D, please indicate by saying aye. I sure hope that. Do I have to say all the rulemaking? Do I? Okay, I will.
That would
I'm
make our
just
hearts.
trying to earn my paycheck here, absolutely. So do I have a motion to open rulemaking procedures for AAC R72604, R72604.02, R72604.3, R72604.5, R72604.6, R72607, R7261002, R72616, and R72619 pertaining to education certification. Do I have such a motion? Member Burton, thank you. Do I have a second? Member Kravitz, thank you. Any additional conversation or concerns? Hearing none, all in favor of approving, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Move us on to 5E, presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures for certification fees. Director Williams.
Thank you, President Corr, members. Same narrative. If members have questions pertaining to item 5E, the opening of rulemaking for R7-2-618, catch our Deputy Director Baden can make himself available. If not, I would recommend moving the motion.
Please, Member Haley.
I just had a quick question, Catcher. Our Deputy Director, Bates did, I believe you had a question, or you included in the draft that we received about whether or not these also included endorsements.
Yes.
Is that resolved?
Yes, Dr. Corr and Member Haley, yes, it does include endorsements as well. So any application for certification would also include applications for endorsements, which are attached to the certification.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns or comments? Okay, then do I have a motion to open rulemaking procedures for AAC R72618? Do I have such a motion? Member Burton, do I have a second? Thank you, Member Myerson. Any questions, concerns, comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Fantastic. I'll move us on to 5F. Presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures regarding minimum course of study and competency requirements for graduation from high school. Director Williams.
President Corr, same narrative. Any members have a question? We are available.
Anyone have any questions or need for clarification before I call a vote? Seeing and hearing none, I will ask for a motion to open rulemaking procedures for AAC R72302. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Burton. Do I have a second? Perfect, thank you. Questions, comments, concerns? Seeing, hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Fantastic, I'll move this on to 5G. Presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures for the Empowerment Scholarship accounts. Director Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Corr. If members have any questions, Kesher and I are available.
Some question.
Please.
First of all, thank you so much for all the work that you, Kesher, and Keisha, the rest of the SE team have done on the updating the regulations. I did have a question, maybe it's an observation, maybe we can figure out a way to clarify. We've had a number of questions presented or statements that were presented to us earlier and have been the last number of months since I've served on the board of concerns the way ADE manages the ESA program. And so looking at the department responsibilities, I wonder if there is a way that we can update the regulations to reflect some of the comments that we have consistently received at meetings every month. It was really helpful when we received the report from Terry O'Brien that there were some individuals that found the men and women who staffed the help desk incredibly helpful, but then there were others who found them to be not knowledgeable of the process, not knowledgeable of the ESA program. So I'm wondering, one, is there a way for us to make a recommendation, possibly through the rules, maybe this is out of line, to standardize training across the board so that there is an effort so that everyone is an exemplar rather than just some ADE staff. And then again, we've heard at meetings since I joined the board in March, what is and is not approved, and there continues to be back and forth discrepancy. And I believe that in the handbook, we discussed at great length this spring, like, do we need to be more explicit? And I went through the class wallet list of all the different curricula items that are approved. If you're a parent that's joining the ESA program for the first time, they go crosswise and they not know exactly, is this Lego, is this manipulative, is this board game, whatever, and the back and forth of at times misinformation, I think, is frustrating for parents. So if there's a way for us to clarify the department responsibilities in there, I think that would be really, really helpful. And then two other things. Is there a way for us to deal with privacy protections? This we've heard repeatedly. I know that it has not happened of late, but we've heard at every meeting that I've attended concerns about men and women, their children being publicly identified in 2020. I think it would be very helpful for us to be able to address that concern. And again, I'm not sure if it's not in this specific place or if it's somewhere else. And then finally, and this goes back to a point that Member Clark raised about whether or not we have information of concerns about the financial management firm, whether or not there is a help desk to address that particular issue, or is it with Treasury? Anyway, I think it would be very, very helpful for us to have that information since it's explicitly stated in the quarterly report. So those are four things that I would wonder if we could figure out a way to address those things in the rules and regulations, because there are issues that come up every meeting, and perhaps this might be a mechanism for us to address those issues.
President Corr and Member Haley, good suggestions. And I'll be careful not to overcommit, because it's not just overcommitting for myself, I'm overcommitting for
Yeah, short timer, be careful.
But I guess I think I can say as with the text of the agenda item, I think we can certainly take all that stuff back and research it, review it, and then see if there's some recommendations we can make. I think I can also say pretty confidently off the bat, there might be some things around the standardizing training for ADE employees, which is potentially a line that we may not even be able to cross or would want to cross, because that's personnel management of ADE employees that I don't know if our board really has the authority to get into. But we can certainly look into that and all those other things. And and the privacy protections is another tougher area that has come up before, that's been on our list of how do we tackle this and should we tackle it? And it's really been a question of how do we, we're not really sure how to tackle it, but I think it is worth, trying to look back into. And then the list of approved items and what's an approved expense. Since the board got involved with the ESA program just a couple of years ago, that immediately rose to the top as a priority. The board tried to do some things in the regulations and the rules, and it obviously continues to be a priority to try to figure out. And I think the challenge is, and I've mentioned this before, is that by its very nature, the statute is very broad in what can be an allowable expense, and can sometimes simultaneously be somewhat specific, and that's by design. The program is supposed to be very flexible, and so that can make providing clarity on what is explicitly approved challenging. But having said that, the board did try to put some things in place to address that, and it sounds like there's probably still some more that may need to be done. So yes, we'll take all that.
Thank you, Kendra. Anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah, please, Member Clark.
Thank you all for your work on the ESA rules and all the rules. There's a lot here. And I definitely, as a parent whose information was released in 2020, related to that whole situation, and was able to look up and see my kids' information on there, was very disturbed as well. I understand the challenges of, it's not really a FERPA thing. We looked into it a lot then, but anything we can do to revisit that, I think would be really helpful. So thank you, Member Haley, for bringing that up. One of the challenges, and just as a little bit of background for board members, but then also as we're having this conversation, opening up rulemaking, regarding the approvals, I think there's never going to be, nor do parents want, like a single list. The list that's on the Department of Education's website is helpful. It's supposed to be regularly updated, and it's supposed to serve as kind of like a resource or tool. I think we have these broad guidelines, and we like those because there's always new companies, new vendors, new entrepreneurs that are coming out with new things. And so we like all of a sudden being able to, as an ESA parent, get something new that's approved as long as it meets the statute and the rules. So we like that kind of broad, those guardrails. I think a lot of what the challenge is related to what the actual process is on the back end at ATE when a decision is being made that yes, this item is approved and this isn't. And there's a lot of errors, because even just last week, I made a purchase for one of my kiddos. I got a rejection with a rule on the rejection email, and I said, that rule does not relate to the item that I was approved. The item that I approved is actually in this marketplace as an approved vendor. And it was, oh, we're so sorry, we can't reopen that, go through the whole process all again. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm wondering what on the back end flagged that to not be approved. And that's the piece that if there's any way we can add some clarity of like, this is the 3-step, 4-step process. Statute is checked, this is checked, this is checked. That could be a start to understanding and providing some clarity about how those decisions are made. Because all I know as a parent is I get a rejection email. So that's part of the challenge. Catcher, transportation and electronics, that might have gotten, I think that's part of the new law, which I believe is going into effect. And so I think that might need to be looked at, but I also could have missed it, or it may not have been in the color. So let's just look into that maybe.
Dr. Core and Member Clark, we added, so there's a prohibition in the rule on transportation of the pupil, and that the new law added that exception to allow transportation services under certain circumstances. I think we had I don't think our board rule had or does list all allowable expenses. We just reference statute.
Okay.
And so when they added more allowable expenses with that bill, rather than we just continued to not list them, we just reference the statute that has them. So if the board would like to list them in the rule, that you can certainly ask for that. I don't think it would be a problem. I think the big reason we didn't do that is that then we'd have to always, it's just one more thing, and it's also one more opportunity for us to, or if we mistakenly just copy and paste something from the statute, which sounds like it shouldn't happen, but sometimes that happens. But
that's
just the context, but we can add that.
There's one other, actually two other items that I wanted to potentially look into as we go into this process of time to investigate is, one challenge is that the approved items that are in statute, those categories, when we are making purchases, they do not align. And so I think that it's very confusing for parents because we go in, we make a purchase, and then there's 20 different categories that we can say that that's in.
President Core, Member Clark, when you stated they don't align, is this within the third-party vendor? Is this with the approval document on the department's website?
It is when we are categorizing expenses. So I go into my ESA portal, upload a receipt, and it can go in 20 different places. So I was just thinking maybe we might want to align those approval categories with this statute, and that could be something to investigate for the rule. It's twofold. One, I think it protects parents because we see a category here and it's like, oh, that's approved, but then that's not aligned with the statute. So that discrepancy there, I think, is confusing for parents, but also risk. So that's something to investigate. I don't remember if this was restricted by statute or not, but regarding counseling and evaluations for non-special needs kids. Currently, right now, I have a child on the ESA program that is a sibling, so they did not qualify as a special needs child. So I have a situation right now with my 7-year-old. I need to go pay and get her an evaluation for dyslexia to find out if she has dyslexia, but I can't use my ESA for that. It's restricted. So I'm vaguely remembering that we might have looked into that before, but I'd love to look into that one more time. And then that same issue has been brought up by ESA parents related to right now. In the public school system, families do have access to counselors that aren't specifically educational therapy related, but we do not have access for that as ESA families. So that was one other item. Then I had another thought in my mind, I didn't write it down. It was related to, yes, I think we might have been waiting on this. There's that new addition to the law that we will know soon if it's going to affect related to private evaluations being, you're not excited, you know what I mean? So I'm wondering, can we visit that or craft some things around that? Because right now, to qualify for the empowerment scholarship, if you have a child with special needs, even if you're a home educated child, you have to go through the district evaluation process in order to get the paperwork that you need to say, yes, this is a child with a learning disability. It's a very lengthy process. Most parents aren't able to get through that process. A lot of times parents end up spending thousands of dollars to get a private evaluation to take back to the district just to get the piece of paper that says they can get on and get set. House Bill 2853 started the process of fixing that, allowing private evaluations, like from a speech language pathologist or a private diagnosis of autism, so that you could, so that we could save all of that time and burden on the public school system and allow those families to qualify with ESA directly. So I think we're gonna need some rules around that, even though there was like a 3-step process in the law. Like first, the Department of Education can make that decision. Well, we already know that the Department of Education has been supposed to have that process for the private evaluations, they haven't. So then the second part of the law was the county school superintendent, thank you, as I was thinking, right, county school superintendent, if ADE doesn't do it, they can decide what the guidelines are for how a family can qualify for the ESA with a private evaluation. And then if they don't, then it falls onto the parent, and there's like 3 or 4 things listed in the law. So we might need to build that out.
Revocations, please.
I have a technical question for staff and Clark. So you iterated 2 interesting examples. I'm thinking, is there a third example, and if so, how is it covered? You have a child who's already receiving an ESA, the child has a disability. Let's make one, let's say it's dyslexia, but now you're suspecting they may have autism. Can you use your ESA to get the independent evaluation to actually change the diagnosis potentially?
So you can use your ESA if the child is already on, or let's say dyslexia on the ESA, you can use those funds to go get an independent evaluation for autism. However, that private evaluation that you receive will not increase your ESA award amount to the $28,000 for autism. You have to take that back to the school district. It's a big part of what I do all the time. And get them, the school district, to agree to update the child's primary diagnosis to autism. And of course, that is one of the most significant barriers that families have when they receive an autism diagnosis, is they are then trying to negotiate, I've got a private diagnosis, I need the district to agree, because I cannot get my ESA award amount for autism. So it's a huge challenge.
Anything else? Anyone else? Fantastic. Then with that, I will seek a motion. Do I have a motion to open rulemaking procedures on AAC Article 15 Empowerment Scholarship Accounts? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Member Clark, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second. It's Member Haley says.
It was, okay, thank you. I knew it came from my right. Thank you, really appreciate that. Any other conversation? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Fantastic, thank you. Move on to item 6. Do we have anyone who wishes to chat with us for item 6, call to the public?
Not for 6, 2 for 8.
2 for 8, okay. Then I will move us directly on to item 7. This is the consent agenda for certification enforcement actions. We've got a number there, but because this is a consent agenda, we can take these in a single motion if no one objects. Do I have a motion to approve items 7A1 through 7A22, items 7B1 through 7B4, and items 7C1 and 7C2, and 7D1 and 7D2? Do I have such a motion? Burton, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any conversation, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor of approving consent agenda item number 7, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. All right, we will move on to agenda item 8, a call to the public, and as referenced earlier, we have some folks who wish to speak to us. Director Williams,
President Carr, we're still going with 2 minutes, correct?
please.
Okay. Yep, perfect. Thank you, Jessica. Sorry, I just want to make sure. All right, first up, we have John Jarndez. DeJarnetz. And followed by Susan Swanek.
Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Oh, good, okay.
Can.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. On April 5th, 2020, I had an emotional breakdown directed at 6th grade students at Altaloma Elementary School. My behavior was unprofessional and embarrassing, and I humbly apologize for the dishonor which I brought to myself and the teaching profession. It is appalling that I presented myself in such a callous and ignorant way. I know better, and I deeply regret my behavior. I have learned a very important, serious lesson about myself and others. I feel compassion and understanding when others lose control. I've witnessed students losing control, and I'm reminded of my own experience. It is not appropriate to lose control just because things are not going as expected. It is appropriate and expected to ask for help, and I failed to do this. Since my failure, I have learned to conduct myself in an appropriate and professional fashion at all times. Inappropriate behavior on the part of students must be dealt with in a calm and consistent fashion. If the class is out of control, which should be rare with proper classroom management, simply seek help. I have come to love teaching and sharing my knowledge and life experience. Hearing a young person say, "Now I get it," is simply a delightful thing. It is my hope that you find it in your hearts to allow me to continue teaching. I would be grateful to you to let me prove myself, and I vow to show my best qualities, not my worst. Thank you for your consideration. With great humility, John Desjardins.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Susan Swanek.
Executive Director Williams, Susan Swanek. is not
She's
joining.
in, Jessica, she's in the room. I apologize.
No problem.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Kaur and members of the board, Dr. Williams. I was wondering if I was going to be able to see over. Thank you. Yes, that's great. Hi, I come to you as a retired teacher who taught in the Phoenix metropolitan area for over 30 years and helped open a little substitute company about 13 years ago. And within this little company that we started, Mr. Desjardins is a part of our substitutes that we dispatch to the various different schools that we give service to. From day one, Mr. Desjardins has been enthusiastic about teaching, learning about the client's school, community, culture, and adapting to each one. He has been cooperative with staff and students and has been specifically requested by each of our clients. Mr. Desjardins, his residence is in Youngtown in the Northwest Valley. We serve schools from Buckeye to Apache Junction, and he has served all of them with no complaints. On the contrary, they compliment on how flexible he is. And if they have to switch him to a different assignment, he gladly takes it. Mr. Desjardins is generous with his time. When requests come from schools that are far away and no one else wants them, he generously takes them. He has committed to take any and all requests and has stood by his word. He is so reliable that we know we can always count on him. Mr. Desjardins always expresses gratitude for his assignments, for any direction or suggestion given to him. When he shared his experience with me about his loss of self-control, I was very surprised. He expressed his remorse and embarrassment for his behavior. I told him to just figure out a way to apologize and make amends for it. And I feel that he has learned how to be a better person since this experience. He has represented himself well with confidence and tolerance and hasn't hesitated to ask for help. We are grateful to have Mr. D among our guest teachers. We would highly recommend that he be allowed to keep his certificate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
President Corr, that concludes calls to the public number 8.
Thank you so much. Then I will move us on to items 9, items under 9. 9A speaks to negotiated settlement agreements. So if there was no objection, we'll be able to take these as a single motion. Again, these are negotiated settlements. Do I have a motion to approve item 9A1 through 9A6? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Clark, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vice President Burke. Any questions or comments or discussion? Hearing none, then all in favor of accepting item 9A, the negotiated settlement agreements, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Thank you. So there are some particular requirements that I read on these next negotiated settlements, but or not negotiated settlements, I'm sorry. Item 9B speaks to discussion regarding Mark Brinton, case number C 2021-012555R. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and the recommendations of the PPAC and deny the application for certification of Mark Brinton for a period of 5 years and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Clark. Do I have a second?
Second.
Was that Dr. Clay? Dr. Clay, thank you. And again, I'm not looking to end any conversation, but simply get the motion on the table. Any conversation, questions, or comments regarding 9B? All in favor of approving item 9B as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Okay, again, I'll follow the same protocol of getting the motion on the table and then we can have any conversation. So item 9C, discussion of Laura Teresa de la Fuente, case number C 2021-004742. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendation of the PPAC and suspend the teaching certificate of Laura de la Fuente for a period of 1 year and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Haley. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Clark, thank you. Any conversation, discussion, or questions? All in favor of approving item 9C as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Passes. Move on to 9D. Presentation of the case regarding Resi Deerdorf, case number C 2021-011947. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and suspend the teaching certification of Resi Deerdorf for a period of 3 years and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So
Clay, thank you. Do I have a second? Vice President Burton, thank you. Any questions, comments, discussion? All those in favor of approving item 9D as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Don't, I'm losing here now. Stick with me. Stick with me. Anyone opposed, same sign. Very good. Motion passes. I will move us on to item 9E, case of John Desjardins. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusional law, and recommendation of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of John Desjardins for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Member Clark, do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Clay, any conversation or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving 9E as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. 9E passes. 9F, presentation of the case regarding Richard Gwynn, case number C 2021-012-669. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendation of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Robert Gwynn for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified?
Dr. Court, for the record, that's Richard S. Ginn, Richard, not Robert.
Oh, I don't know why I looked at Richard and saw Robert.
That's okay, I'm here for you.
I apologize to Robert Gwynn, who's out there, who's done nothing. Richard Gwynn, thank you. And just, so I'll say for the record, Richard Gwynn, case number C 2021-012-669. Then I will seek a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendation of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Richard S. Gwynn for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified. Do I have such a motion? Member Kavickas, do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Clay, thank you. Any conversation, comments, or discussion? All in favor of approving item 9F as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. 9F passes. Move us on to 9G, case of Anthony Heaton, case number C 2021-000-578. Do I have a motion to adopt the finding of that conclusion of law and recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate for Anthony Heaton for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion? Member Burton, do I have a second? Member Kravitz, thank you. Any conversation, concerns, or discussion? Seeing none, hearing none, all in favor of approving item 9G as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Passes. 9H, case of Tommy Lewis Jr., case number C 2021-000-589. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendation of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Tommy Lewis Jr. for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Haley, thank you. Do I have a second? Member Kavickas, thank you. Conversation, concerns, comments? Okay, then all those in favor of approving 9H as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Move us on to item 9I. The case of Latasha N. Parker, case number C 2021-011-333. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendation of the PPAC and suspend the teaching certificate of Latasha Parker for a period of 2 years with conditions, 2 years with conditions, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion? Member Burton, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Clark?
Yes.
That was close. All right, Member Clark. Member Clay's not happy about losing out on that. Any comments, concerns, or questions regarding this? Hearing none, then all those in favor of approving item 9I as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to 9J, case of Kevin Seeger, case number C 2020-000045. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Kevin Seeger for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion? Member Kavickas, do I have a second? Vice President Burton, thank you. Any conversation, concerns, or comments? Okay, all those in favor of approving item 9J as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Moving on, a motion passes. Moving on to item 9K, case of Jessica Tulin, AKA Kuffner, case number C 2020-000037. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and suspend the teaching certificate of Jessica Tulin for a period of 4 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion? Member Kavickas, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Clay, thank you. Any questions, comments, or discussion? All in favor of approving item 9K as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We'll move on to item 9L, case of Samuel Villalba, case number C 2021-004886. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and the recommendation of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Samuel Villalba for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion? Member Haley, thank you. Do I have a second? Member Kavickas, thank you. Any questions, concerns, or discussion? None, I will, all those in favor of approving item 9L as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Move on to item 9M, case of Cavan Walker, case number C 2021-011-945. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and the recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Cavan Walker for a period of 5 years, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Kind of shamed you into that. Thank you, Member Clark. And anyone, a second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Member Healy. Any conversation, concerns, or discussion? So all in favor of approving item 9M as presented, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. That brings us on to our final agenda item, a summary of current events, future meeting dates, items for future agenda. Again, a reminder that our next meeting Slight change of the schedule, October 17th. That is a Monday. Director Williams, anything to add at this point? Any members with any announcements? Yeah, Member Kravitz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I'll go quickly because I know we're ready to go. I apologize earlier for attempting to make some comments when Superintendent was giving her briefing. I thought that was the right time. I'd like to reiterate them now. I'm going to say it all quickly and tell staff I'll follow up with you later so we can go. But I'd like to request from ADE statewide assessment data disaggregated by disability by grade level, but only at the state level, so not by district or school, just at the state level. Also request that there be a review of the COVID impact data disaggregated by disability. Next, I said, in December of last year, the board adopted recommendations to move on the reading program. The board committee decided that some of the items would be forwarded to the legislature and some would go through rule. The ones that went to the legislature passed, and I'd like to request that the rulemaking packet be open to address the remaining items from that report. And finally, during the past few meetings, and again today, we've heard a few members, including myself, discuss some special education concerns. In fact, at the end of our last meeting, Member Clark and I raised some issues regarding special education evaluations. After that meeting, I did some research literally in my hotel room that night and discovered that 15235D says that the Division of Special Education may review special education programs, including placement of pupils, to determine that program evaluation and placement procedures. I'd like to advise the parents I'm hearing from to be able to, So I'd like to figure out how, because I know in a lot of states, the state board rulemaking covers most of those processes. That's why I'm raising it here, because in most of the states I've looked at, it's actually in state board rule. But I don't know what the solution is, but some way that we can bring those concerns through superintendent to the director. And finally, even though I was a member of the Special Education Advisory Panel, I was unaware that the statute actually says that it's established to advise and consult with the State Board of Education. 12 of the 22 members of that, as you know, because we approved them, are actually parents or individuals themselves with a disability. And it seems to me that that panel is the appropriate forum for us to be discussing and advising with them, or them advising us on some of the issues that are raised and some of the potential solutions. So I'd like to request a presentation of that panel. So I know some of the members probably don't know what the panel is or what they do, and a distribution of their annual reports. And at that time, the board can potentially discuss what the proper processes are to be developed. And I apologize for all the stuff, knowing that our staff is leaving us, sad, but I wanted to put all that out there.
Sure, and thank you. Purpose of my redirecting your request earlier was just during the superintendent's report. It's just that it's more of a report as opposed to not to squelch any desire for information or anything else. So appreciate that. Other comments for the good of the order, Dr. Klein?
I have one. President Core, this is the captor. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for your leadership, your wisdom, your tenacity. We're going to miss you really, really bad.
Peace out.
You know what, I'm going to use the chair's privilege to give the last word today to Deputy Director Bate.
Dr. Core and members, thank you. It's been a privilege, and I told Alicia this before, so she'll have heard it twice, but I can only hope that the information and advice that I have given over the last 5 years that you all found it helpful. I hope you found it helpful, and all board members did as well, and I guess that's all as a staff who serves elected or appointed officials can really help. So I hope that's it. I very much appreciate all of you, and I feel very lucky at this time. Thank you. Yes.
Bad news is you're leaving. I will adjourn this meeting at 1:28 and thank you all for your efforts today.